Good evening. I'd like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, May 21st, 2019. The Portland Board of Public Education is meeting at City Hall in Council Chambers. May I please ask the Superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Atkinson?
Here.
Mr. Balfont?
Here.
Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Ms. Figdor? Ms. Davis? Ms. Morioni?
Here.
Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Mr. Raro?
Here.
Mr. Inabanza? Mr. Norris?
Here.
Ms. Power-Rakowski? Mr. Samuntu? Mr. Abdirahman? And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. And so Ms. Davis did let me know that she won't be able to join us today, and Ms. Anna Powers-Rakowski also informed me ahead of the meeting that she might not be able to join us. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For the report of the chair, I just had one quick item I wanted to mention. The City Council met last evening and voted 8-1 approving the city finance, the school board's school budget. This budget is $450,000 less than the budget that we approved here in the school board on April 8th. The agenda this evening includes a motion that asks the board to revise the budget, reducing the amount to reflect the City Council's approval. And I'm sure in a moment when we get to the committee reports, Ms. Trevorrow from Finance Committee might give us a little bit more information about that. Maybe not. Tonight, for the report of the students, we were due for a PATH report, and like I said a moment ago, Ms. Anna Powers-Rakowski won't be joining us, so we'll be skipping that report. Next, for the report of the superintendent, Mr. Botana, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Over the past few weeks, I've been visiting all of our schools to recognize the contributions of all of our staff. I'll be wrapping up the visits this week, and it's been a wonderful experience being able to walk into most of our classrooms and personally shake hands and thank our staff for all of the hard work and dedication. Our Portland Promise makes it clear that our people are our greatest resource and that all of our goals rest on our ability to attract, support, and retain the most talented and diverse group of educators. Today, I was going to recognize one of those folks, Nurse Becky Bell at Casco Bay Paths, but Nurse Bell is feeling under the weather. It's that time of year, and so we will definitely honor her at our next board meeting if she's able to be here. Yesterday, I had a chance to meet with all of our new teachers as they wrap up the year with our mentoring support team. This year, Assistant Superintendent Nally and I committed to meeting with this cohort during the school year to ensure that they had access to us to help them understand the critical role that we hope they will play in the future of our school system. I'm incredibly impressed with the level of knowledge, commitment, and curiosity that they bring to their work. They're all exceptional. But I would like to congratulate one of them on a special accomplishment, Olivia Bean, a new science teacher at Portland High School, who recently won a 5-year Knowles Teaching Fellowship for early career math and science teachers, worth approximately $150,000. Ms. Bean is in her first year teaching in her first teaching job at Portland High School. She's an alumni of Bowdoin College, which recently made the announcement of the award. The Knowles Teacher Initiative is a national program of support for exceptional new teachers. The teachers are given professional development, mentoring, and financial support over 5 years before becoming senior fellows in the program. Approximately 35 new fellows are selected each year. Jackie Cuthbert, Casco Bay, she's my son's crew teacher, so I know her as Miss K, so I don't think I've actually ever said her name. But Miss Kay, Casco Bay's new chemistry teacher, became a Knowles Teaching Fellow last year. She joined Casco Bay this school year after interning there the previous year. And so this is just an example of some of the exceptional talent in our brand new teachers here in Portland. So we're very, very proud of them. We're entering the final stretch of the school year. Over the coming weeks, our schools will be buzzing with the end-of-year demonstrations of learning. Today, during Board Focus, we'll see one of these demonstrations in the form of a capstone project. Last week, we honored our Make It Happen graduates, and Portland High School held its annual Scholarships Award ceremony. This week, PATH students graduate, and we will bestow Seal of Literacy Awards on our students who demonstrate competency in at least 2 languages. And also this week, the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz will have informative performances at both Portland High School and Deering. I love this time of year because we're able to see how all of the hard work of our students and staff come together as students prepare to turn the page, and I look forward to many opportunities to witness this firsthand over the coming weeks. Today, the National Education Policy Center, based at the University of Colorado, recognized Casco Bay High School for providing all of their students with a rich curriculum and strong learning opportunities in a warm, welcoming, and inclusive school climate. Announced each year in collaboration with the Washington Post, the Schools of Opportunity Project identifies excellent public high schools that actively strive to close opportunity gaps, the differences in the opportunities and resources that drive the well-known achievement gaps. Our Portland Promise talks about the importance of reducing the opportunity gaps that some of our students experience as a way of helping all of them achieve their full potential. Casco Bay High School was conceived on this idea. I'm grateful but not surprised that Casco Bay has been selected as Maine's first ever School of Opportunity. Every day, Casco Bay staff works to help every student to aspire to and see the roadmap to their greatest self. Please join me in congratulating and thanking the faculty and staff, students, faculty and staff for this recognition. Last Saturday, we hosted a regional emergency situation simulation and response with first responders from all over the city and county, including our district attorney, as well as representatives from the Attorney General's Office, State Emergency Management, and FBI. The simulation of an active shooter situation was both instructional and sobering. When I started in education almost 35 years ago, I would have never thought that this would need to be a part of my repertoire as an educator. I'm grateful for the competence, commitment, and seriousness of our first responders in the law enforcement, emergency medical, and emergency management community, and feel reassured that we're prepared to respond to these types of situations. I'm particularly thankful to our Portland Police Department and Fire Department for their continuing partnership with our schools. But I cannot let this opportunity pass without renewing my call, our collective call for gun laws that help prevent access to weapons to those with criminal intent or mental health concerns. Last year, the board resolved to call on local, state, and federal authorities to limit access and enact sane gun laws. Tonight, we renew that resolve. Finally, I also want to remind all of our staff and students that safety requires all of us working together to identify and intervene to prevent dangerous situations and keep our schools safe spaces for learning. Our whole student goal focuses on making sure that every student has a meaningful connection to a caring adult. We know that the most significant deterrent that we can come up with is ensuring that all of our students feel safe and supported in their development as human beings. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent. Excuse me. For the report of the Secretary, consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting of May 7, 2019. Is there a motion? Ms. Victor, second by Ms. Thompson. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion? Oh, look at that. Seeing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting of May 7th, 2019, please indicate. It's unanimous. Ms. Bondo, you were not
I was
abstaining. All right, so, excuse me, 7 in favor, Ms. Bondo abstained, and students voting in favor as well. Thank you. For the report of the committees, curriculum and ed planning, Mr. Balfons, are you ready to report?
Yeah, the curriculum committee will be meeting next week, Tuesday, May 28th at 6 p.m. at the central office.
Thank you, Mr. Balfons. For operations, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Operations Committee met on May 2nd, and on our agenda we talked around energy conservation and the history in the Portland Public Schools. We also very minimally began the discussion around start times for our schools. So we will continue that conversation for quite some time. It's just the very beginning of that. Our next operations meeting will be on Thursday, June 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Finance and personnel, Ms. Trevor.
So a lot has happened since our last report. Notably, yesterday, as Chair Rodriguez pointed out, the council acted on our budget. Leading up to that, since our last meeting, there was a City Finance Committee meeting on the 24th, which several of the members of the Finance Committee attended along with staff, and we were able to kind of get the city's first look at our budget after they had been presented with their budget. And the feedback that we got was very respectful. They appreciated our budget. They understood our goals. But there was some level of discomfort with just the overall increase. So we kind of took that and we met as a Finance Committee on May 9th. And went over a list of possible reductions to our proposed budget in preparation for, with the expectancy of being asked to reduce the budget. Then last week, the City Finance Committee took action on our budget, recommending a $450,000 reduction to our proposed budget to the City Council. The City Council acted on that last night and passed the Finance Committee's recommendation. So tonight we'll be taking up an item that will put our budget into accordance with that. Notably, process-wise, we thought that we were going to have to vote on this tonight and then send it back to the council. But it sounds like the lawyers from each side have talked about that and figured out that we don't actually have to do that. Once we approve it tonight, it'll go forward to the ballot. So our next meeting is scheduled for June 13th at 6 o'clock. I'm not sure exactly what will be on the agenda yet. At some point, I would like to do a debrief on the budget process with an eye toward the process next year. So that may be an option for that. But keep that date penciled in at 6 o'clock at Portland District offices. And a reminder that the budget referendum will be June 11th. And that concludes my report.
Thank you so much. Ms. Victor, you had a question?
Ms. Trevorrow, I just wanted to flag that there might be a scheduling conflict on that date due to the negotiations with PAE over the teacher contract, and so there might be a request coming to you to see if it's possible to move that date.
Okay. That would be fine. Like I said, I'm not sure exactly what we'll have for agenda items anyway, so we'll just kind of regroup and see where we go with it.
Thank you.
Perfect. And that conflict just came up yesterday as we were in a meeting, so appreciate Ms. Victor bringing it up today. Public Affairs Committee, Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Chair. We met last week and discussed a concern that was raised by several Longfellow PTO parents around parents in the schools generally not fully understanding or fully buying into the Portland Promise. And so we had a really good, substantive, deep dive conversation around that. Member Balfons joined the committee for the evening, so that was wonderful. So we had a great conversation, and that's going to continue at our next meeting on June 11th. And we'll come up with some strategies and bring them forward to the board to get parents more invested in the work that we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. And Appointments Committee, Ms. Morioni.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have anything to report at the moment. We're still finishing up those policies that need to come to the full board, but as of now, we don't have a upcoming meeting time. So, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Morioni. And for other committee and our member concerns, we are going to, are we going to do the Nsba thing now? Do we have any, before we get started with that, I was going to say, do we have any other member committee? Okay, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On May 16th, the District Advisory Building Committee and the Building Level Advisory Committee for Lyseth met at the Lyman Moore Middle School Library. We talked a little bit about the board action that was taken on May 7th in regards to this project. Harriman, our architects, also gave us a presentation, and we talked about some value engineering cost reductions. We have a recommendation coming forward to the board in a meeting to be determined. In the staff, I have to say, did some really great work in looking at areas where we can make reductions for the $2 million overage of what we thought. Also, the contractor as well really dug in and rebid some of the subcontractors, and we were able to find some savings there as well. So we will be bringing that forward to the board as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. And are we ready to present? Excellent. So, Mr. Atkinson, please go ahead.
Apologies. Just one thing I forgot to mention in the public affairs section is that we have a Coffee with Constituents event happening tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. at Tandem Coffee on Congress. So the public is invited to attend, and any board members that can make it are definitely encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you. I was laughing because I had something else too, and I almost got in my own way. So I just wanted to report the Family Partnership, the Family Partnership Advisory Committee meets every month. We met this week. We had a handful of things on our agenda that were really informative. First, we had the Director of Intervention and Support in the districts, Gail Creasy, spoke to us about the Every Student Succeeds Act, and shared information about different programs that are covered under Title I, Title II, III, and IV, just asked for our input on ways to invest those funds so that we can start to gather information across different groups on how to best use those that title money. We also had, we began to have a discussion on school discipline. This is something that a lot of parents and a lot of community members have had questions about. So having the discussions at the Family Advisory Committee was one of the steps that the district wanted to take to gather input about how do we better communicate the school discipline issues. And then lastly, that's it. I think the rest I have here is just supporting documents. That's all I had for the Family Partnership Advisory Committee. So for the Nsba conference, are we going to get up there and get fancy? Like in the podium? Awesome. All right, let's go do it.
Then we have to come off.
Yes. So we are going to, back in March 29th, the school board attended the Nsba, the National School Board Association annual conference in Philadelphia. Ms. Thompson, Ms. Morioni, and myself were the 3 board members that attended, and we were joined, for the first time, we had our student reps join us. So we had 3 student reps that came with us, Ms. Tiana Ure from Casco Bay, Ms. Isabel Clater from Portland High School, who could not join us today, and Ms. Anna Powers-Rokowski from PATH, who also could not join us today. But the rest of us will pick up and share a little bit of information about our trip.
Sure. Sure, I can kick us off. Do we have images we want to show while it's happening?
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. It's so great to be back. My name is Tiana Yuri, and I'm a former student representative from Casco Bay High School on the board. Y'all remember me, but first of all, thank you so much to the board for supporting the student reps and attending the conference. It was truly a wonderful way to stay connected with the board and continue our own journeys through education policy. In a conference of adults, it was incredibly enlightening to view the event from the lens of a student. Now, for our first pre-conference workshop, it was a subject on why board actions matter and how they affect student achievement. The presenters discussed the importance for boards to set and follow high standards, measure progress, and work to improve performance and practices. The outcome, they demonstrated, was higher student achievement. They created clearly defined roles for each member of the education system, from the superintendent to the teacher, and outlined the system of governance best fit to create achievement. However, some of our critiques of this presentation was their advocacy of less board member involvement in the community, unclear definitions of student success, and finally, a lack of student voice apparent in their platform. Despite these pitfalls, it was still enriching to hear from educators across the nation about their triumphs and challenges across the sessions. From budgeting to sexual assault, the insight of these fellow board members and superintendents gave great insight to the unique struggles districts face and the striking similarities that allow us to unite in the face of adversity. After the pre-conference, we attended a series of fascinating sessions, some of which aligned with my opinions and some of which challenged my pre-existing beliefs. But the session that impacted me most was titled Crossing the Lines, When Educators Become Predators. In this session, the presenter described the struggles from his home state of Missouri, where since 1997, there have been 241 public schools teachers who had their licenses revoked for sexual misconduct with students. It included testimonials from 6 different Missouri sex offenders, male and female, and all formerly teachers who are currently in prison. It also included testimonials from student victims and the process by which sexual assault occurred. Always present in these breaches were inappropriate communication outside of class and unmonitored time in the classroom. Students were always emotionally vulnerable, or the teachers justified their actions with vulnerability. There was always a grooming process and signs that an inappropriate relationship had developed. And this is back, but there we are. Now, for me as a student and a female student, experiencing this session was very jarring. These instances, rather than outliers, were prevalent in every district across the country. At the end of the session during Q&A, 2 mothers stood up in the audience and shared their experiences with their daughters assaulted by teachers in their districts. These stories are heartbreaking and difficult to hear, but overwhelmingly necessary to prevent sexual assault within school systems. Attending this session made me fear for my sister, my peers, and myself, but the point of the talk was not to garner mistrust. It advocated for small but significant changes to prevent these occurrences. This could be positioning desks so that they face the classroom door and keeping that door open when possible. It could also involve policy around communication, which is allowed between students and what's not allowed, and during what hours, and prohibiting rides alone with students. While some of these restrictions I did not find applicable in the real world, this session made me aware of the issue and support actions for change. Sometimes it's the truly frightening realities that force us to look deeper and pursue reforms our students need to see. Beyond this intense topic, I gained so much from the Nsba conference, from facilities budgeting to litigation policy. It was a very special moment to witness, board members coming together to collaborate and share at a time in education where many are facing more challenges than ever before. I am so grateful to have been given this opportunity, and I will carry the lessons I've learned for years to come. Thank you. And now we have Ms. Morioni.
We were all just saying that we don't want to be the one following Tiana because she's such an excellent presenter, and we're so proud of our students. We wish we had taken more photos, but these are the ones that we were able to capture. It was a tremendous 4-day event, and we had 3 keynote speakers that we attended, and I'm just going to give you a few of my highlights. one you see up there, Sir Ken Robinson. He is a New York Times bestselling author, but he mostly talked about, from his book, Creative Schools, the Grassroots Revolution That's Transforming Education. He talked about basically, it sounded like he was describing Casco Bay High School, honestly. He was describing where kids have more of the power in the classroom to make decisions about what they're learning and when they're learning it, and how, and he give the tools to teachers to become almost more like coaches and in a setting of helping students, but letting the students pretty much run their education. It was pretty remarkable, his presentation. But one of my other favorite pre-conference sessions was we took pre-conferences that were half days, and my morning one was board actions do matter. What you do impacts student success. So it was very in-depth around how if the board can set and follow high standards for themselves and measure their own progress, it can make a huge difference in the student's performance. And they gave examples from case studies in Washington State, Idaho, and Montana. And they gave sample board self-assessments. So I took away some great ideas about board self-assessments and how we might want to consider that in the future. In the afternoon, I attended an amazing session around disrupting poverty, the board's role in turning high poverty schools into high performing schools. And this was based on the research by William Parrott of Boise State University. But he gave, and I actually brought copies of his book, and it's actually internationally known now, the 5 practices of how you can disrupt poverty in high poverty schools. So I definitely want to share that with board members and and our students as well. Then on Saturday, we took quite a few sessions, but I'm just telling you about the highlights. One of the Saturday events was preparing students today for careers for tomorrow, and I thought that was going to be a lot more around similar to maybe what paths is teaching and that type of thing, but actually it talked a lot more about hard skills and soft skills, and how right now our students, the more they can learn around responsibility, dependability, organizational skills, communication skills, writing skills, reading skills. If we can make sure those are strong in our students, then they will be able to basically be successful in any career they choose. So that was really nice to kind of pare it down and boil it down to really critical, so what they were calling soft skills as well. Then on Sunday, 2 really important sessions that I attended. One was around artificial intelligence, and it was named Artificial Intelligence Demystified, Fact, Fiction, and the Future of Learning. And what I took away from that is we're way behind, all of us. I mean, not even just in the classroom, but just in terms of our understanding of how quickly artificial intelligence is taking on everything from our cars that are driven on their own, to books now that can be written by a robot without even a human, surgery that's being already performed across different countries by robots. It's pretty remarkable how quickly artificial intelligence and robotics and technology is taking over. So they talked about they called it the 4th industrial revolution, and talked about what we need in terms of in the classroom, and that was something I took away thinking it's definitely an area to work on within Portland Public Schools. And then the final one was Mission is Transformation, and this was all around the skill set for creating long-term cultural transformation towards respect, sex, consent, and bystander intervention. And this was mostly my takeaway from that, and 2 of our students attended with Chair Rodriguez. The takeaway from that really was around teaching consent and making sure our sex education in our schools, as well as how we are teaching, again, the social, emotional, and learning piece of it, respecting all backgrounds of students, and most importantly, making sure we had a really good support system in place in our schools and with our staff and community around sex education and consent and supporting survivors of sexual assault. So really, really powerful sessions. I know I went on a little too long, but yeah, I highly recommend for any of the board members and our students to attend in future years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moran. I was hoping I'd sneak in after the students and before Sarah would speak to kind of be unnoticed. It's a wonderful conference, my second one attending as a school board member, and by far my favorite part was having the students with us. A couple of months ago, might even be less than that, the Maine Department of Education Secretary Pender Making was either giving an interview or it was an NPR discussion, and she's talking about how one of the challenges in public education is the way that it's monetized, right? The amount of people that are looking to make a profit out of education, and that's something that we need to be aware of. And so then here we go to this conference where literally all the vendors that are included in that comment are present. And what was for me most impactful, the easiest way for me to see beyond that and really get to the value of those conferences is having the students with us. Seeing things through their lens and having their perspective as we shared, as we walked out of sessions and shared our takeaways was just really, really special. I think it brought the entire conference to a different level for me. So I'm incredibly proud that the board decided to invite them. And that they were able to make it and join us. The second, really close second highlight for me, I got to celebrate my birthday while we were away. And the team, our group, was really, really nice to make me feel comfortable celebrating a really special birthday so far away from home. So I'm really thankful for them for being really thoughtful of me and being great travel partners and conference partners. So thank you so much for that. And I think Ms. Thompson is going to kind of set off the fireworks now with her talk.
Thank you, Chair. I have given all of you a brief synopsis in the recognition of time constraints because there is a video that we would like to show. But a couple of the pre-conferences that I attended, highlights for me were Could You Last a Month in Poverty? And that was an unbelievable session that I attended. In essence, what it was, and I'll be happy to share it all individually, but I think it's a great professional development activity that we should all go through. In short, each of the attendees of this session was assigned either a job, social services like unemployment or Social Security, or you had a role to play as a daughter, father, mother, etc. We were all given what our circumstances were, whether a family or single-parent household. We had cards provided that it stated if our parents were employed, unemployed, and not able to work, looking for work, or attending school. We were allocated a certain amount of money by family unit and then had to get through an entire month with those funds. Additionally, we had noted for us what our monthly bills were, whether we had a car or took public transportation. If there were children in the household, any special people, family circumstances like a disability, child in the house that was pregnant, as well as numerous other circumstances that came into play. I could go on, but I think this briefly describes the intention behind the session. Again, if you'd like to discuss it further, I'm happy to share it with you because that was one of the best sessions that I've attended. The second one was multi-generational community engagement and how to tell your story. That I have a PowerPoint that I'll share with you all through email. And one of the sessions as well was called Coding Today, which I thought was really absolutely cool. That was with folks from Apple, and they talked a little bit about the curriculum that they have that's all free. And more so about everybody can code, and we coded in the class, in the session. So I thought that was really cool. And a highlight for that was for the students was we were talking to this gentleman that put on the Apple presentation, and we started talking about Portland Public Schools, and he said, well, my sister works for the Portland Public Schools, and this gentleman lives in California. And we turned and we said, well, what's her name? And she's Senorita? Yeah. Senorita Orth. And the kids were all like, oh my goodness. The students were like, I had her for school, and I had, so we had to take the picture. That was the picture of the two students with the gentleman in the middle. And the other part, we saw the whole, the students behind the bars. And and what that was is the whole Portland Public School team took a part of a day and went and toured the Eastern State Penitentiary. Eastern State was the first true penitentiary in the country. There were notorious prisoners at one time, such as bank robber Slick Willie Sutton and Scarface Al Capone. So that was something that the students were very interested in, and the adults got to take part in that as well. At each of the 4 National School Board conferences I've attended, they have shared at opening ceremonies a video with Life Touch Memory Mission from the previous year. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on that, but every year the video is shown has reaffirmed for me why we do the work we do for the students. Oh, there we go. Just a little bit of context. During the NSBA conference this time, attendees were invited to apply for the One National School Board Association spot. In a little bit of context with regards to Life Touch, if you'll bear with me, in 2015, Life Touch leaders visited the rural community of Rio Grande, Dominican Republic. For the first time, this small community nestled within the mountains was rich with sheer beauty, yet lacked hope for the children's future. A one-room school provided education for about 18 students. The rest of the children were faced with a difficult decision to walk 5 miles round trip for a half day of school, or if they were old enough to work to help support their family. Faced with this decision, most children did not attend school. The Life Touch is the company that does, for a lot of school districts, the photography, the class photography and individual. So with that, they support projects that support families and education. In 2016-2018, the Memory Mission teams built a bright yellow 2-story school and a cafeteria for the families of Rio Grande, a true beacon of hope. Returning to the school for its dedication ceremony in October of 2018, they learned that 70 new families had moved into the community because of the school. That meant that even more children would have the opportunity to attend the Rio Grande school. But it also caused a problem. The school isn't big enough to accommodate that many students. So they're going back in 2020, January of 2020. I'd like to show you a quick video, and then I'll close that out with some other information.
And I'm a marketing leader with Life Touch. And we are proud to build hope with our educational partners here in the Rio Grande, the Dominican Republic. The following video will highlight this current Life Touch Memory Mission. Truly a life-changing experience for all of us.
I've applied 9 out of the last 10 years, had heard how it's a life-changing opportunity. I'm extremely excited and blessed to have the opportunity to be here.
We come down the hill coming into Rio Grande, you see this large yellow building, and it's just outstanding because it stands out amongst all the other homes that are here. Visiting with some of the other villagers here, they are so filled with joy that people from the United States and Canada come down to build this school for their children.
As a parent, as a leader in a school district, and as an educator, I hope we can do more. This opportunity has opened my eyes wide to a whole new view of what I can do in my role. I want school districts, organizations, and the administrators associations, just like Life Touch has done, they have put a lot of effort to be able to help.
To see the twinkle in the kids' eyes when they see us building this school, to see the adults in the community, if they did nothing else, they kept saying thank you. Shows to me that this school is more than just a building. It's the heart of the community.
When you talk to the children about their dreams are no different than the dreams and aspirations of our children in the States. Without having a school to pursue those dreams, it would never happen. But now there's a chance for that to happen.
I've worked with Life Touch a long time. I've seen Life Touch's heart. I've worked with the heartbeat and the people that I've worked with, but I've seen their heart here, and that has been a dramatic change for me.
I thought I might be prepared for Picture Day in Costanza. It was a whole different experience itself. A lot of these kids have never had their picture taken, and there's a sense of awe, like, what is going on? And I can look into some of these kids' eyes, and I instantly have a thought of where would they be if they didn't have this? And the hope that these families are getting just with this school. And they are telling us, we've been sent here by God. And that hits you straight in the heart. And I'm extremely grateful. And I know I'm a better person.
We just enjoy what we have. We pray for what we need, and we just receive the answer for what we pray, and we say, oh, God is answering me. God is using their hands to help us in our community.
The kids and the village of Rio Grande definitely had an impact on me, both educationally and emotionally.
So coming at the airport, Now I don't see the same faces. I see hearts full of joy, of faith. It's just such a great blessing for me to see what God's doing through you here.
I came here to help and to make things better for them. But then you see these kids' eyes and you see what's in them, and they do so much for you. You can't do enough to pay them back for what they do for you and how they change you. It transcends everything, just in love.
The children here are really our teachers. They're the ones who have instructed us about what's important. This has been a wonderful week. Truly life-changing.
I think the next day is going to be the hardest. Saying goodbye to our new friends, and I think the hardest thing to think about is that there's a fear that I may never be back. So I want to take in as much as I can and bottle it up and So we shared this video with you because during the National School Board Association Conference in Philadelphia, the attendees were invited to apply for the one spot that the National School Board Association was given by LifeTouch. LifeTouch does all of the fundraising throughout the year for this trip. Nobody attending the trip pays for any kind of accommodations or flights or anything. It all comes from LifeTouch and not the districts that they serve. The last 4 Nsba conferences I've gone to, I've applied to take part in this mission. And when we got back from Pennsylvania, I received a phone call from Minnesota that I was chosen as the person to represent the National School Board Association. And needless to say, I was floored and very humbled in order to go to this wonderful mission, and I'm kind of speechless. But we will be going in January, and what we'll be doing is adding an addition onto the school that you saw because of the families that have moved into that community. So the director of the program said, well, make sure people know that you're not going to sit on the beach and you're going to be sipping Mai Tais or anything of that nature. You're going to be in the mountains building a school. And that, to me, and as you saw from the video, is very life-changing for a lot of people, and I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to attend along with the students. We learned so much while we were there, and I highly recommend for more of us to go on future trips. Thank you. Just close it.
But thank you so much.
Great slideshow, Marnie. Sarah, we're all so excited for you to be to take part of that trip. I don't know if I've told you, one of my best friends in the whole world, one of my closest friends growing up, lives in Dominican Republic. Yeah, so it's, I have a lot of love for Dominican Republic and the Dominican folks. I have a lot of friends out there. Yes, Ms. Morini.
I don't think I said it, but we all came back with lots of resources from the sessions we attended and books and things like that we want to share. So please, other board members, let us know if you're interested in seeing anything. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Marnie. Next, for our consent items, will the superintendent please speak on the items listed?
Yes, under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district. As required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board memo accompanying this item. And as has been the practice, each donor will receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to excuse me. I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance. And the contributors at this meeting are for Riverton School. Riverton Elementary received the following donations: pizzas for the Riverton Family Potluck from Otto's Pizza of Portland, a donation for school use from the Hannaford Helps Program of Portland, another donation for school use from the Riverside Hannaford in honor of the recent store remodel and continued commitment to the community, a third donation from the Riverside Hannaford to be used for the Riverton Girls on the Run program, and a gift card to purchase supplies for the Riverton Family Literacy event from Shaw's Supermarket of Portland. The district music program received 2 tenor saxophones, a soprano saxophone, a marching mellophone, and an E-flat horn to be used for students in the band program from Del Brown of Portland, Maine. And we're very grateful for their support of our work.
Thank you, Superintendent. For the board focus on educational issues tonight, I think we have someone presenting on the Portland High School Capstone project. Are you setting us up, Superintendent?
I intend to, if I can find my notes.
But no pressure. Take your time.
Okay.
So. We'll just all stare at you.
Just stare at me while I dig them up on my computer. I had them before. Okay. Yes. As I mentioned earlier, this time of year is an opportunity to see the deeper learning that is happening in our schools. A few years ago, the graduation policy changed to require that students complete a capstone as part of meeting the Portland Public School diploma requirements. The capstones are akin to a thesis or final paper in that they show deep understanding of a topic and bring to bear the qualities of scholarship that students have developed over their high school experience. Tonight, Elisa Membrano, senior at Portland High School, and Miriam Duell, a junior at Portland High School, will present their capstone, which was the result of pursuing their interests in international relations by participating in the Camden Conference and a quarter-long class at Portland High School considering the question, quote, "Is this China's century?" This class was taught by Portland High School social studies teacher Troy Crabtree, who was here. Oh, here he is. Miriam and Elisa have learned a great deal about China and international relations, and each developed a U.S.-China foreign policy position that they will be presenting. And obviously, we all know that this is a timely and important question. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Crabtree and his marvelous students to take it away.
So part of this capstone requirement involves questions. So hopefully at the end of the presentations, you could have some questions for our students.
Hi, my name is Miriam Duell, and I'm currently a junior at Portland High School. I was interested in international affairs, but there was no classes at Portland High School where I could explore this career. My history teacher told me that he was going to be teaching a class called Camden Conference in the classroom. The class talked about international affairs and specifically the current international relationship between China and the United States. The Camden Conference took place in February at Rockland, Maine, where 14 schools from around the state participated in the Camden Conference. Portland High School and Deering High School were represented by students and teachers. The main focus of this year's topic was, "Is this China's century?" The Camden Conference is a civil form of global issues, and one of my favorite keynote speakers, Martin Jakes, the author of the global best-selling book When China Rules the World and the End of the Western Era and the Birth of the New Global Order. Published in 2009, expanded it and updated in 2012, and has since sold 4,000 copies and has been translated into 15 languages. His TED Talk on Understanding China has reached 3 million views. During Martin Jakes' keynote presentation, he talked about what China will be like as a superpower. For example, China has only fought one major war, so they're not in major debt. China's economically has the potential to be something that we've never seen before. For example, China has 34 higher GDP in 2050, while the United States will only have 15% higher. Also, China is giving money to developing countries and building better relationships with them. Martin Jakes concluded that the United States will be in competition if China becomes a superpower. During my time in the Camden Conference, I chose a foreign policy. Due to the Brown Choices program, I chose my foreign policy. I learned about trade laws and child labor laws. The trade laws with the United States and China has been tense due to Donald Trump and his new tariff placed on some imports from China. For example, the Donald Trump administration has publicly announced a hike taxes of $2 million imported from China to 25%. As a result of Trump's tariffs, the United States is losing money from goods that are normally exported from China, and China has, in result, China has retaliated. For example, China has published the goods traded a simple sending of 5,000 items from trade to 25%, covering places from products of in China. One of the reasons why they are the world's largest export is because businesses are employing children. These children are not being paid significant wages and have bad living conditions, which can cause really bad health problems. In my opinion, I think the best way to approach the relationship between China and the United States is to press for democratic values and to promote stability in trade. The United States should press for democratic values because supporting China's reforms now will center our ties to a generation of politicians that will eventually rise in China's government. Also, taking a firm stance against China's abuse of human rights and oppression of minors will serve as a warning to dictatorial governments around the world. Promoting stability in trade will build a trusting relationship with Beijing in order to work as partners instead of enemies. This is my position of China and the United States in order to keep peace. When you look at the news today, you see that the United States, in relationship with other countries, does not promote diplomacy. Due to the Camden Conference and the Camden Conference class, in the future, I hope to study foreign policy and political science. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Elisa Membreno and I am a senior at Portland High School, and next year I will be attending Pomona College in California. Tonight I will be presenting my own take on Chinese foreign policy, a position I was able to develop through a quarter-long elective offered at Portland High School and through the information I gained at this year's Camden Conference. The question you see here on the screen was the guiding topic of the conference this year, and although it is an incredibly difficult question to answer definitively, it is important to consider when developing a foreign policy stance. So, is this China's century? Well, in all honesty, this remains to be seen. China is certainly a rising superpower, as it has steadily increased its GDP and decreased its isolationist tendencies since the late 1900s. It has not yet, however, fully earned the grand title of superpower of the century. Two ways in which China is currently seeking to earn this title include the Belt and Road Initiative and the government-sponsored tech company Huawei. The Belt and Road Initiative, also referred to as the New Silk Road, is one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in history and would mimic the original Silk Road by stretching from East Asia to Europe. Simultaneously, the Chinese government is looking to expand its influence through the spread of Huawei's 5G network. Just the other day, the Trump administration issued a ban on telecom equipment supplied by foreign adversaries, clearly targeting Huawei, as it believes that China could access secure information through the network. Some restrictions have since been lifted, but it is clear that there will be animosity between Huawei and the U.S. going forward. So, although these two examples do not prove that China is on its way to becoming a global superpower, they are important to keep in mind and serve as proof that China is a viable adversary for the United States. Now to my foreign policy stance. Creating a foreign policy position while the United States and China are currently in the midst of a massive trade war is a difficult task. On one hand, it is easy to identify the ways in which we could have acted differently, but on the other hand, it is frustrating to attempt to imagine long-term policies while the current ones are constantly changing. One way in which the current relationship between China and the U.S. is unsustainable at the moment is the lack of diplomacy. As I speak to my own foreign policy position, it may seem as though I believe that China will readily accept the policies that the U.S. creates. This is not the case. I fully understand that foreign policy is a result of diplomacy on both sides of the discussion, and the foreign policy that I have created is simply what I believe would be the best scenario outcome. But current politics aside, as I began to develop my stance, I settled upon two core values that I feel encompass the necessary qualities of a sustainable relationship between the United States and China, these being stability and human rights. In regards to stability, the current trade war is a prime example of why policies targeted towards long-term stability are a necessity. Although it is true that China has been exercising unfair trade practices, imposing tariffs on Beijing is simply not the sustainable way to approach a solution, as we are now billions of dollars deep in a trade war with no plan for de-escalation. Instead, I believe the U.S. should focus on establishing long-term economic policies, complete with safeguards, and should work towards creating a peaceful and cooperative relationship with China through treaties that guard against unnecessary competition. While the current administration seems to believe that ignoring China's economic rise will somehow render it non-existent, the reality is that it is growing and will continue to grow in coming years. It is imperative that the United States work towards a relationship free of hostility if we want to maintain our trading privileges with China in the future, as China is one of the United States' most important trade partners. In regards to China's unfair trade practices, the U.S. should not seek to put pressure on China on its own, but should gain the support of its allies as well, as a collective effort is much more likely to yield results than a one-on-one battle. In regards to human rights, there are two major issues that I believe the U.S. cannot ignore while creating foreign policy, the first being climate change. Although not specific to the citizens of either country, a future relationship between the two will not exist unless actions are made to protect the sustainability of the Earth. The United States and China are two of the biggest carbon emitters in the world, representing about 40% of global emissions. And as long as neither country works toward passing major climate legislations, the issue of environmental sustainability will continue to press upon us all. I believe that it would be wise for the U.S. not only to work towards national climate legislations, but to press for the U.S. and China to work together in an effort to increase environmental sustainability. The second major human rights issue that I would like to highlight is the re-education of Uyghurs, a population of religious peoples that reside mainly in the western provinces of the country. As China is a communist nation, outward portrayals of religion are prohibited. Consequently, the area where the Uyghurs reside has become akin to a police nation, with citizens under strict watch. Much of what we know about this human rights violation is a result of Uyghurs who have escaped and taken refuge in the United States. It is my belief that the U.S. should use their influence, alongside other democratic countries, to encourage the Chinese government to work towards disbanding their re-education efforts. I believe that focusing on China's human rights violations should be a top priority for the U.S. government. in terms of foreign policy, as it opposes U.S. values to allow for the blatant violations to continue, especially considering China's growing economy, population, and global power. To conclude, the challenge of all foreign policy is that you must be able to anticipate the future. I believe that it is a safe prediction to make to say that China will be at the forefront of foreign policy in coming years, whether the U.S. is prepared for it or not. Now I would like to open the floor to questions with Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Does anybody have a question? Ms. Moroney?
Excellent job, both of you. Really, really great. In my former life, when I moved from D.C. here, and I was with the Department of Commerce, and I was in international affairs and would go overseas to negotiate with the Chinese in the pharmaceutical industry. And what I was thinking of as you were talking, I like both of what you were suggesting in terms of the Chinese look at their history as centuries, not years, not even decades. They look at it like a very slow drip, and that they will, because you're right, they have not had any major wars. I mean, they've had some Asian disturbances, of course, in their history, but they are, it's almost like literally a crouching tiger type of approach, and seems how they operate. When you go to negotiate with the Chinese, it's very easy to, they say a lot of yes. They say a lot of yes, we'll do that, we'll take care of that. But not necessarily. So I like the idea what you're talking about with regards to making sure we're in a collaborative effort with them, because as you're right with foreign policy and foreign affairs, if you're not working collectively in a path moving forward, we're going to get left behind and potentially could be a danger to us. So my question to you, sorry, long-winded way, but I would love to continue this discussion over coffee or something, and I'm happy for you both moving forward onto college. But mine was around intellectual property and how much you read more, researched more around how much our U.S. intellectual property is basically being taken over by the Chinese. Did you get into any of that or read anything around that very much?
Not so much. We were definitely looking into the current issues with Huawei and that network and the U.S. fears of secure information, but we didn't get into that so much.
So, an example would be that all of our technology that we are creating here in the United States quickly goes over there and is being sold on the black market, and you can get a video that hasn't been even put in the U.S. theaters is already on video for sale in their markets for like, $5. So it's so quick that they pick up on our intellectual property. So it's just something you may want to read more about as well. It's very fascinating, also very difficult to get a handle on. But that's another way that they're very savvy about taking over a lot of the hard work that our workers put into, again, technology and pharmaceuticals, whatever it may be. But great job, you two, and keep up the hard work. It's awesome.
Ms. Bondo, I think we have another question.
Another question? Yeah.
Is around what you just mentioned about the human being violation. And as two of you, I see you have two different aspects of the life coming from different communities. So as the next generation, and you see around education, and you see the Chinese youth are taking actions now. Because when you look at the past, what they have really from their father founding, I mean, Mao Zedong is the one being all isolated China for over 10 years to make China the way they is right now. So how did you see the advocacy coming up about any issues about human being violation? How you can compare what they have and what they are advocating right now and what's happening right now in the United States, and what kind of action then you see for the future as the next generation. Then you can align yourself to try to advocate for better well-being for the human's right.
Yeah.
So with China, currently young people within China are protesting, and they are working for to speak their mind on issues as human rights, because they see it as a new generation that's coming up, but that's like being born with technology and like hearing stuff from around the world, and they do see that China is violating major human rights, and they are working to speak their mind and to hopefully change people that are in power to change that stuff. But with the United States, I think it's just being woke and being aware of the different stuff that's going around in different countries, and trying to put your voice out there to help people that can't speak for themselves. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, exactly what I was waiting for. Thank you.
Something also that they were talking about at the Camden Conference was that it really helps to push for Chinese youth to come to school in the United States and then bring sort of the democratic values that they learn here back to China. Mm-hmm. That helps create a movement. Yeah. Thank you.
Ms. Thompson.
I wasn't going to say anything, but then you just brought that up. Myself and the previous superintendent went to China as part of the college board that does the SATs, et cetera. We were invited over there from the Chinese government. And to your point of the students are sent away so young, away from home. And when we talked to the students, they were so in awe of the United States and how badly they wanted to come to U.S. University. And they talked a lot about that in the competition, et cetera, to get here in the United States. And when you showed the picture of the pollution, it just made me think about the fact that I wore a mask the entire time I was there, because it's almost like breathing in a wood stove. You never see blue sky. So it was quite a trip. I learned a lot, but it makes me very thankful to live where we do. So thank you for all of your hard work.
Good. If there's no other questions, I'll just say thank you for presenting. Great job. Loaded topic. Relationships between China and the U.S. There's so much that we can probably break down and have discussions about. I'd love to hear more about the conference and what you guys have learned about that. Thank you again so much for presenting.
Can I just...
superintendents, yeah. Oh, yeah, we can do that.
And I would also just like to thank Assistant Principal Kathy Markey-Gerard, who's here tonight. Kathy has actually brought the Camden Conference to PPS, and she's been a champion for many years for having students engage in this important event annually. So thank you, Kathy, for your work and your commitment.
Thank you. Next, old business, consideration and action to approve a resolution for establishing a process for naming an elementary school for Gerald Talbot. Is there a motion? Ms. Morioni, second by Mr. Atkinson. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion?
Yes. On February 1st, the board received a letter signed by Mayor Strimling and the other 8 members of the Portland City Council asking that you rename one of our elementary schools after Gerald E Talbot. Prior to the April 2nd board meeting, Board Chair Rodriguez asked staff to evaluate what's required in order to make a name change in our buildings. Staff reviewed policy and past practice and discussed that with council. Board Policy FF, which is in the packet, outlines the procedure that the board is to follow in renaming a school facility, which includes public notice, school board review, and school board action at a public meeting. And obviously with a public meeting comes testimony as part of the open meeting. The board is being asked to approve a resolution tonight that formally directs the board chair to work with staff to establish and implement a process consistent with board policy to review possible sites and seek community input and report back to the board on the viability of renaming one of our elementary schools after Mr. Talbot. During the board workshop on this topic on April 23rd, I noted that Policy FF generally contemplates a somewhat different situation in which the board is evaluating different names for a specific location. In the possible action that's being considered today, the board is being asked to identify a location for a specific name. During that board workshop, board members asked staff to review with council whether the existing Policy FF applied or whether the board would need to create a separate policy for this situation. Board Legal Counsel Bruce Smith reviewed the issue at the superintendent's request and agreed that the current policy did govern this situation. He made a recommendation to revise the original resolution to indicate that the board process would not include solicitation of other names. To that end, the packet that you have in front of you contains the original resolution that the board reviewed at its first reading, as well as an alternative that reflects Mr. Smith's suggestions. Also in your packet, there is a copy of the email from Council Smith advising us on this direction. So that's it.
Thank you, Superintendent. Is there any questions on the motion? Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we also asked for there to be discussions with the various schools that are being contemplated. Did those conversations happen with the staff at any of those?
No, that was not a request, and that would be subsequent to actually moving forward with this process. That would absolutely be a part of that, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? If I have a quick question. So because we have two different versions of the resolution, one that's been amended, so when we vote, do we need to adopt this change to the resolution via somebody proposing an amendment, or I'm just wondering process-wise, how do we indicate that we want to use the amended or the suggested
I
wording?
will defer to the board on the actual protocol for that. Either one of them would be would accomplish, that you did not have that amendment at your first reading, so it does need to be amended in some way. You can accept the amendments that Mr. Smith proposed or do any others, but I wanted to make sure that you had that reflected in the that you had an actual resolution with that amended language.
Excellent, perfect, thank you. Ms. Thompson?
I guess I just have questions around the fact that this coming in front of the board with it stricken, and I understand we can do an amendment, et cetera, but I'm just a little concerned in regards to this because having served on 2 building committees, and to your point, we were looking for names for new buildings and not looking for a building to rename. But it was a very public process for those items, and to not allow the community to also suggest other names. I know the intent here is specifically for a particular person, but my concern is that it then makes it all about that one person. And not that that's a bad thing in any way, but I'm just saying there were so many names that came forward for Ocean Avenue, there were so many names that came forward for East End and for the Rose School, and there was a public process that happened, and now this is taking away part of that public process, because what we're doing is we're saying we're going to do this, and we're going to pick a building, we'll talk to the community and see what you think about it, but again, this is kind of a surprise to me that this takes out a large part of the public process in my opinion. Again, removing who this discussion is around, I think it's really important that we do honor somebody as special as this, but there are also other people in the community, that past and present, that have given a lot to the city of Portland, and those names have come forward time and time again, as well as this particular name. So if I think it's justifying to the community to say that one name or person is more important than the ones that they suggested for other notable people in Portland is very concerning to me. So I may be in the minority with this concern, but this is a surprise to me to remove part of the public process at this light. I'm not in support of this amendment coming forward like this. It's already stricken before we've even done an amendment, so a little concerned.
And just a quick reminder, we're on the questions on the motion, so if anybody has a question, shoot. Ms. Victor? I got that. I totally understood, Ms. Thompson. Thank you. Ms. Victor?
I'm very supportive of this resolution with the amendment, and I'm anxious to move forward with it. I do have 3 copy edits to make to the document, so just to flag that, and if you can help direct me to the appropriate time to propose those.
Let's get through the questions and then public comment on the motion, and then when we come back to discussion, we'll discuss amendments. To Ms. Trevor, you have a question?
I think I'm noticing that the actual email from Bruce is not in the packet.
I noticed that too.
And not that I have any problem with it, I'm just kind of curious what the...
I will post it in a minute. So just go ahead and ask any other questions.
Yes. Any other questions? Mr. Norris, you want to use?
There's a number of different language used, or there's a bunch of different language used in the in board docs and in the resolution itself for what we're actually committing to. So I would just ask to clarify that we're specifically committing to naming not a facility, not a school, but specifically an elementary school.
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Bondo.
I will support the amendment because we just keep around the same situation like we had on the previous one. And we already get, I think, when we go to the Portland Public School, we got the email from Nsba and Bruce giving exactly the answer to our question that we had previously. So I'm really in favor to support the amendment that we have today. Because I see the value behind them. I don't see then we can go all over the game to try to emphasize what have done before. And I think we need to move forward for the respect and the dignity for one person who's been nominated already. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the superintendent is just about to upload the email, so we'll have access to that in a moment. Mr. Atkinson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just reading the new paragraph there, and the last line here is around a process for community engagement and dialogue on the potential naming, and I was wondering if you'd had any thoughts as to what that community engagement and dialogue might look like if this resolution is adopted?
I did not have any specific thoughts, but kind of my initial reaction when I talked to the superintendent about the process is because we're not, as the times in the past when the policy has been applied, because we're not soliciting names, what we're soliciting is the opinion of which school we're going to choose. I envision the community involvement to be guided around that decision under what school would be chosen. And I don't know if that's what the superintendent envisioned as the community engagement, but that's the way that I saw it. It'd be most applicable to the resolution. He's nodding yes.
And the email is uploaded now.
Ms. Thompson.
So I guess I'm confused. So I thought we were creating a process in which we were going to ask the community if they wanted to go forward with this, but in essence, we're saying we're going forward but in choosing an elementary school, not whether or not people want to do it.
The resolution is meant to charge the superintendent and myself to work out a process to identify a school, to identify a process of renaming a current school.
I get that part. But I'm saying, so what we're presenting to the community is that we are going to pick a school and we are going to name one of those schools after this particular person, but we're not really saying whether or not people want to do this, or is that correct?
I think our vote
we're automatically doing that? Is my question? It sounds like
I'm gonna answer your different question with the same answer. The resolution is intended to guide the superintendent and I to figure out a process to identify a school to rename with the name of Gerald Talbot.
Okay. So we're voting on that process then?
We're voting to pass this resolution, correct?
The first plank in the therefores is that the Portland Board of Public Education resolves to establish a process to determine the viability of naming a school for the Honorable Gerald E Talbot. So it is establishing a process to determine the viability of naming one. So it isn't a done deal. It isn't, it requires us to study whether that's viable. So that's the process that would be developed.
My understanding is that if we pass this resolution and the superintendent and I begin to work on this process, and as the process moves forward, eventually it would come back to us to approve any renaming. So there will ultimately be a vote to officially rename a school. This resolution is just to identify the process by which the superintendent and I will figure it out. Oh, that's a horrible way to say it, but you understand what I mean, right? So do we have any other questions? Seeing none, we're going to do public comment, and then during the, so if, excuse me, is there any public comment on the motion? Okay, so this will be an opportunity if anyone wants to speak about the resolution. You want to come up to the podium, please. Please state your name, your address. You'll have 3 minutes to address the board. There's a little timer there next to you, so you can keep an eye on it.
Yeah,
admittedly, I'm not good at interrupting people, so I'll give you a heads up now that at 3 minutes, I'll probably pause you to see if you're near completing. If not, we'll add another minute.
I don't think it'll take that long, but thank you.
Appreciate it.
My name is Elizabeth Crow-Newton. I'm familiar with the timer because I was here for 10 hours last night. Yeah, so I live on North Street, and I guess I just thought it might be helpful if people talked over the history of the existence of the schools. For how long have Portland Public Schools been in operation? Does anyone know that? Is it 150 years? Is it?
It's more than
in the neighborhood of 150 years. Okay. It occurs to me, without knowing the history, but it is a point of information that someone could share who knows it, that probably a great many variety of processes have been used to name schools after individuals. And I would just really encourage the school board, let me start with, I read the article about Honorable Talbot in the paper, and I think it's beautiful that you're considering honoring him. And I guess I just have to say, as a white person, I would just really love to see you unanimously pass the very vague language about looking into the process of this, because I imagine that in our city, I grew up in Auburn, but in our city, that with much less consideration, schools have been named after white men. So, yeah, I think you mentioned Representative Bondo, I think you're my representative. You mentioned dignity and respect, I think were the words that you used, and that sounds really great to me. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to address the board? Great.
I'm not good at talking, but
few of us are. It's okay. Do you mind? I'm sorry. Do you mind pulling the mic? There you go. Just so we can all hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay. I've known Mr. Talbot for a lifetime almost. We're both of an age where things need to happen soon, or while we're alive. But it's been a lifelong mission of Gerald's and mine to help our people and your people from the beginning. Way back, probably 50 years ago, we helped with the fair housing. We used to knock on doors and ask people if rent's available, and they'd say, look at us and say, no, they're not. And then we'd send a colleague who was white, and of course there was rent available. But we've marched and cried and prayed and did everything for our city and our country. And I think Gerald has been at the forefront for 60 years. I'm sorry. But he's been a representative. He's written a book. He's helped not only my people, but your people along the way. And I think it would be a nice thing if you would name a school after him. It would make me proud that after all these years, finally, one of us are recognized. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Ellen Mackenzie, and that was my mom, June Mackenzie. So she really speaks to the heart. I understand that there is a process. I'm certain there are many names that people can bring up to honor, both past and present. But we're not talking about anyone tonight except for Mr. Talbot. And when my mom talks about the work that they put in to make change in this city, I remember I grew up in Portland. I've lived in Portland my entire life. I'm one of 8, and I graduated from Portland High School in 1982, and I can count on my hands how many African American families were in the city. And it's incredible to see the diversity that we see today. And so for children that are growing up in this generation, looking at President Obama and seeing someone that they can look at, a leader of the country that looked like them, I compare it to the city and being able to attend a school that's named after someone that looks like them. And not just for African Americans, but he works, and, you know, bless his heart, he's still alive and fighting. And I think that's who we'll see until he takes his last breath, that he's very genuine, he's honest, dignified. It's really hard. I was very close to my dad, and, you know, he passed in 2001, and I can look at Mr. Talbot and see that kind of love in this great man. So I think that many people would be honored to have a school, and talk about education and how important education is. He's raised 4 incredibly bright children, 3 that still remain in the city. One's lives out of the country, but and his grandchildren and his great-grandchild. I mean, it would truly be an honor, and I hope that you all take it in deep consideration. And again, I know there are other people that you know, are worthy of that recognition as well, but we're talking about him, and it would change multiple lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the school board. My name is Ethan Strimling. I'm here as the mayor of the city of Portland. As one of the signers of the letter, I did just want to highlight a few of the pieces that are in the letter to describe for the public a little bit more and remind us exactly who the Honorable Gerald Talbot is. I'm honored to have some of his family here. I know that he would be here, and his wife. His health did not allow him to be here tonight, but hopefully he is watching if he can, or perhaps his wife is. The Honorable Gerald E Talbot is an educator, an author, an historian, civil and human rights activist, founding president of the Portland branch of the NAACP, and a public servant. His accomplishments are too lengthy to fully itemize in this letter, but as you are well aware, his impact on the state of Maine and our great city has been exceptional. His record is quite vast and includes, but is not limited to, served in the United States military, registered black voters during extremely tumultuous times of racial unrest, helped lead an interfaith and multiracial group of Portlanders to Washington, D.C. in order to attend the infamous March on Washington in 1963. Successfully helped to lead efforts to pass the Maine Fair Housing Bill, the Maine Human Rights Act, and establishing the Maine Human Rights Commission. Challenged racial discrimination practices in Portland's rental housing market 3 times through the courts that led to reform. Helped revive the Portland chapter of the NAACP in 1964, appointed as the first African American to chair the Maine State Board of Education, elected the first African American to the Maine State Legislature in the state's history. He served for 3 terms and used his position to fight for the rights of migrant workers, sponsored the first great gay rights bill, led efforts for gun control, tribal sovereignty, fair housing, equal employment opportunities, and health care. He also championed and led an effort to create a holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King before it became a federal holiday. He received an honorary PhD in humanities from the University of Southern Maine, and perhaps his most remarkable achievement was a bill he got passed into Maine law while serving in the legislature in the face of 26 members voting against it that removed a dozen Maine place names that had the N-word in their moniker, such as N Brook and N Hill. This extraordinary act then went on to inspire and serve as a model for Maine's tribal representatives to successfully, and this year thankfully, finally get legislation passed that removed the word squaw from geographic place names and maps and now from mascots. I just wanted to read that to remind us that I don't think there is anybody in the city of Portland who is more deserving of this, whomever they are, in reflecting the values of the people of this city. The Honorable Gerald Talbot I have had the honor of knowing for almost the full 30 years that I have lived in the state of Maine, and he has certainly been an inspiration to me, but he just scratches the surface for what he's done for me and compared to what he's done for the entire city. Whoever he was, he is as deserving as anyone I know. So I thank you for taking this up, and I hope that you will pass the resolve this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other public comment?
Good evening. My name is Peter Stuckey. I live at 20 Vale Street over in East Deering. I actually, this is my 50th year in Portland, and I'm happy to say that I have been inspired and informed by Gerald Talbot and his family for almost that entire 50 years, more than 49. Jerry was one of the first people I met when I got to Portland, and he has, for the past 5 decades, continued to inspire and inform me in ways that are content-oriented, for sure, but more than that, it's his soul and his sense of humor and his just unwavering optimism about the opportunity that life presents to all of us every single day. He's one of the finest and most courageous people I've ever met. I'm honored to call him a friend, and I'm here because my wife and I bought a starter home over in East Deering 45 years ago and sent our 2 children to a school in that neighborhood. We haven't finished the house yet, so we're still there. And I'm here, I was here really to lobby that the school you choose be Presumpscot. And that's, for me, that's, that would be just perfect. And I'm not sure I understand all the machinations, and I'm not going to ask you because I know what you'll say. And I'll be embarrassed to say I'm still not sure I understand. But I want to say 2 things. One, I encourage you to unwaveringly name a school after Jerry. and I think it would be remarkable for this city and for the city going forward as people start to say, you know, who won't have had the chance to actually know the man. Who's Jerry Talbot? Who is he? Why'd you name a school after him? That just opens up a book that is so potentially thrilling to the students who would hear the answer to it. It would inspire lives in ways that it leaves me speechless how cool it would be. So anyway, and don't forget Przemysl. So name a school after him and make it Przemysl. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Any other public comment?
My name is Laura Kelly, and I just moved to 4 Woodmont Street in Portland, which is why I'm dressed like this, and I can't actually find a brush because we're living out of a box. So now that I've called attention to what I look like today, I just point that out because I want you to know how important it was for me to be here. I grew up in Portland, although I've been living in Gorham for the last 13 years. I went to Longfellow Elementary School and then Lincoln Middle. Graduated from Deering High School in 1990. And then I went to Smith College and then medical school at the University of New England and completed my residency in Syracuse, New York. And I'm a pediatrician, now retired. And I want to share with you that one of the things I love about being from Maine is that we know each other. And I've never met Gerald Talbot, but he has influenced my life because I've recently been involved in a piece of legislation that is part of his legacy through his family for advocacy to bring a bill to introduce African American history into the Maine curriculum. And I'm not going to go on about why that's so important, but I just want to say that it's important for us to do things differently. We don't always have to do things the way they've always been done before. And so as you consider looking at creating a new way to find a name for a school, I just want to point out that it's important for us to be responsive, to look at information, to be accountable to the evidence that shows us what influences children. And just because maybe this is a different way of doing things, that's exactly why it's important to do this. So even if this isn't the way we usually go about naming a school, we can still decide that we're going to do that. I feel like something I learned about Maine at Longfellow Elementary School from my second grade teacher was that we were independent and progressive always, leaders, and as it states on our state flag, we lead. So let's decide we're going to do something different, even if it wasn't the way it's always been done before, because it's important. So anyway, I apologize for my dress and my hair, but like I said, I just want you to know that it was that important that I be here tonight and embarrass myself in this way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dawood Umar. I'm here to support naming the school after Mr. Talbot. Just yesterday, Laura and myself and a couple other people had been working on LD 1700, and that's an act for the inclusion of African American history and culture into the public school system, and it actually passed unanimously. So, and this was up in the State House, and I think one of the things that was really fascinating was the testimony about the need for to include African American history. And as I was sitting there, actually the testimony was a testimony about the work that Mr. Talbot had done over the history of his life. and bringing the African American history into the school system that he was allowed to on his own, using his own money, driving around the state, presenting this history because he felt it was important then, and just yesterday they said it was important now. So with that being said, I honestly think that there's a couple of things that happened with that bill. Number one, it had specifically named African Americans history without including anybody else. And that's very important because normally whenever you want to introduce a bill that's going to include people, especially African Americans, it gets flooded with everybody else's concern. So this bill yesterday basically said that they want to focus on African American history, and I feel since Mr. Talbot was the only individual that I know of that was going around the state at that particular time on his own, using his own funding, kind of being hard on the family, but still he was the only individual that was out there making sure that this history was important then, and I think it's only right to come into an elementary school somewhere in this city, somewhere in the state, to honor this man for the history that he had brought forward and the opportunities that came after his work that brought me here to Maine to say that I could honestly respect the members of the NAACP that gave a good example for somebody that didn't have a community to run to. Okay, NAACP provided that. It was a small community fighting against all the odds here in Maine. I think population may have never grown past 0.1%. So with those odds, living in this type of situation, this is a unique history that need to be placed into the Portland school systems, and so that you could realize that the people that was in this state were not slaves. And that's pretty important. That as they came into the state, as the state was developing itself, there was a group of people that transitioned along with that particular freedom. And I think we should be seen as free individuals in the state, remove this negative perception that the people that were slaves at one particular time, and change the history and that particular dialogue. These were free people that was fighting for freedom for the whole country and fought for other people. So I think that's pretty important. The other thing is that as an African American, is that you have to, because this is the history that we're trying to capture, is the history of the Americans, because that's what they call them. It's called the African Americans. So that history of the Americans, that time of Columbus, all the way up to 1619, that's the American history. And then you had an interruption or invasion or introduction of the African history. So those two histories have to be merged. And right now, in this particular city, we have Africans from Africa that actually knows the history prior to that, which is desperately needed in the educational system. You have the Americans that have our history that's desperately needed into the educational system, simultaneously correcting the errors that has been placed on them. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public comment section and we'll move to board discussion. So if Ms. Victor, if you wanted to bring up your 3 points now, that'll be a good way to open us up.
Thank you. And they're very small points. In the 4th whereas clause, we use the word infamous to describe the March on Washington. Infamous has a negative connotation and is not an appropriate word. So you could just strike that word. Or
it was in the, just want to point out, it was in the letter that we received.
I heard the mayor read it as well. It's the word, it's not. It's the mayor's fault. So I'd suggest striking the word, yeah, I think you could just strike it. The second one is there are, in the whereas clause that talks about Mr. Talbot's work on dealing with racist place names, it says then word instead of the N word. So again, just you need like a hyphen there. And I'm sorry for getting into the very small details here, but I'd like to, do this right. Mr. Chair, do you see that?
I'm looking for it.
It's on page 2, the second whereas clause.
Yeah, okay. I see it.
And then the last one is in the next whereas clause. There's just a typo, and it should be extraordinary, whereas this extraordinary act.
Yeah.
And that's all.
So
second.
So we're going to take that as a motion to make those amendments, seconded by Ms. Trevorrow. I think those are pretty self-explanatory, so I don't need you to explain them again. Do we have any questions on those simple amendments that Ms. Victor has proposed? A couple of typos and removing the word infamous. Any questions? Nope. Is there any public comment on the amendment that Ms. Victor has proposed? And this is just to strike the word infamous and to correct a couple of typos. If there's no public comment, any other board discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, so all those in favor of amending the resolution as Ms. Victor stated, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor. Now we're back to the main motion. Do we have any other board discussion? Ms. Morioni?
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez. My only request is also, can we add the semicolons after all the whereases, just clean up the grammatical. That's really simple. But my other comment is this. So I highly respect my fellow board member, Ms. Thompson, and she and I worked together many, many years on lots of things, and we always say, is this process? Is this how we should be doing things? There are times when I pause and I think through that, and I think, okay, this is how we have done things. But in this case, not because I've heard the testimonies here tonight, not because of even what I've read, what the mayor has said to us, but we are striving to work on our Portland Promise, and one of the quadrants in the Portland Promise is equity. And within that equity, I feel as if the more we can show and share to our students that are our responsibility, that we not only talk the talk of equity, but we actually stand by it, and we're willing to, it may be a diversion from the process that we may have always done or usually done. But in this case, I feel it imperative that we move forward and we name one of our schools after this gentleman. And I think it's also because I'm not African American, and I have only studied about the history of African Americans, and all I can do is lend a hand to join hands and be as best moving forward collectively and show to our students in their youth that color doesn't matter. We can move together well if we can move together better if we move together. We can move together well if we move together collectively. And again, the piece right now for me is it's almost a no-brainer, because again, we keep working on the Portland Promise, and in public affairs we're trying to figure out how do we show that to their parents, how are we working on equity in the schools. This is a prime example of that. Let's make sure our schools are reflective, not only in within the schools, but also in the naming of them. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Moria.
And thank you for the family to being here.
Any other board discussion? Mr. Atkinson, yes.
I guess this is a question, but do we need to amend to add the amendment if we want to include this language that that Mr. Smith
I was planning to offer that as an amendment before we got to the vote, because I do like the wording, and it kind of clarifies the way that we are using the policy FF. So I do plan it. I don't know if anyone else wants to beat me to it, but that's what I was planning on doing.
I'd be happy to second you, Chair, if you want to offer it.
So if there's no other board discussion, I'll move to that, to offer a motion to amend the policy as has been suggested, to strike the paragraph on the first there. The second paragraph after the therefore be it resolved. I won't read what's stricken, but to add then that the Portland Board of Public Education charges the board chair with working with the superintendent to design and implement a process that does not include the solicitation of additional names, but that is otherwise consistent with board policy FF naming facilities, that includes a review of existing facilities that could be named, and a process for community engagement and dialogue on the potential naming. Is there a second? Mr. Atkinson? Thank you. So like I just read it, that's the way I intend the amendment. Do we have any questions on amending the resolution this way? Seeing none, any public comment on the amendment? Seeing none, any board discussion on amending the resolution? Perfect. So we'll put it up to a vote to accept the amendment as stated on the document on our board docs. All those in favor, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor. We're back to the main motion. If there is no other board discussion, Ms. Figdor?
I'd just like to say that it's truly an honor to be able to vote on this resolution and to move forward this process. Before the meeting tonight, I went to a rally a protest in Congress Square Park, fighting the rollback to abortion rights in this country. And there were hundreds of people there, and one of the things that people were saying and chanting was "Stand up, fight back." And Mr. Talbot has spent decades and decades standing up and fighting back. And it is extraordinary to have the courage and fight and wherewithal that he embodies is incredible. And his fortitude. And so the opportunity to take this step, I feel really humbled to be a part of that. And it's, I love the idea of having a school named after Mr. Talbot, but far more important than that, than my own feeling, is what I think it will mean to the Black children who live in Portland and attend our schools, and to be able to so appropriately honor and lift up his legacy. I'm really grateful to the council and to the mayor to bringing this forward, and I'm so excited to vote for this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Victor. Ms. Bondo?
I just have a personal comment, and I would like to say, when I moved to Maine 10 years ago, and my kids being born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. When I came to Maine and they're attending the Ocean Avenue, they didn't have in January anything about the Black history, anything about Martin Luther King. And my kids used to come home and say, "Mommy, we just know anything about what's going on." So everything we have learned in Georgia, in Atlanta, about the Black history, how to give more value about the history, about the education, we are losing it. So I've been start teaching my own kids from home what the value they need to stand. And I think what we're doing today is just to change the statu quo about the process, but standing behind the value of what we believe the history need to be made. And then plus, when we taking that history is not only for the people of color, but about the new generation. Because when I see sometimes they're taking for granted what they have in hand. And what we're going to do today and for the next generation is going to teach our students how to advocate for the right, to teach them how to be all united for the next generation to change and to value the work that people has done for the past. Because by the name, they're not going just to see the name, but all accomplishment behind the name, and then they will learn from them, and then they may become the next advocate for the change to come. So this is really a special day for me, because the statu quo can be removed for some special and complex value behind what we believe it should be the change and equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Anyone else? Ms. Motu, go ahead.
Okay, I want to say something maybe can surprise everybody. It's like about my story. When I come in America first, I was been in Atlanta. But when he tell me go in Poland, Maine, I say no, I can't go the place. Why? Because I say in Maine we have just a white people. We do not have a history of black. You know, that thing made me happen. The first thing, and I say no, I can't fight for that. I wanna go that place. When I come here, I want to contact somebody, and I talk with the executive director of PAE, and he starts to tell me, what is your ambition in the Poland? I say, I want to fight for rights and for immigrant people, and we can represent him and make history in America. This day is a big day for me, because today we have a school who have a name of Black America. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So if we don't have any other discussion, I'll say I'm also really much excited to support this resolution. I'll share my when I moved to Maine kind of perspective. When I moved to Maine, same thing. Knowing. Googling and YouTubing Portland, Maine more than anybody should. You start to realize, especially when you come from a big, diverse city like where I grew up, that you're about to move into one of the whitest spaces in this country. And as a person of color, that factors into the decision to move in a way that's really hard to explain, because you think about how it affects your children, you think how it affects your family, even the way that your friends are going to kind of perceive you have no idea what it's like, the things that we have to think about, and not to say that those things weigh us down, but they certainly are factors in our lives that are difficult to translate or to explain to people that don't have that experience. And so moving here, you as a person of color, you start to kind of anxiously look for signs of things alike. You start to look for those people that look and sound like you, and you try to find that comfort area. And it's really, really hard to do in Maine. Even in Portland, where we're as diverse as we are, and then certainly, obviously, in Maine, we stand out. We're not in New York City, we're not in LA, we're certainly not in Miami, Florida. So we have, when we come from those areas and we move to Portland, it doesn't seem as diverse as it truly is. And so any opportunity that we have to put that diversity in a really positive light, and when I see all the achievements and all the records that we have here for Mr. Talbot, I think what better person to achieve that goal? What better person to put up there as a really positive interpretation of what people of color and African American men has done in a state that doesn't have too many of them. And so that, for me, is incredibly powerful from a personal and a community point of view. So I'm, again, enthusiastically going to support this resolution in a moment. So having said that, all those in favor of approving the resolution of establishing a process for naming an elementary school for Gerald Talbot, please indicate. It is unanimous, with the students voting in favor. Thank you all. And thank you all who came today and spoke to the board. We'll keep you guys updated as this process develops, and we explain how we're going to do this.
I'll move on to the next item. Consideration and action to approve the Portland Adult Education 2019-2020 calendar. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Ms. Thompson. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion?
I'm going to turn it over to
Anita.
Director St. Ange to introduce the item.
As far as our calendar this year, it's similar to previous years. We have 3 trimesters. We start a little bit later because we recognize that our students are parents and they want to get their children off for schools. We also recognize that try to take the same school vacations as the Portland Public Schools. One tricky issue this year is the April vacation. We had the choice of coming back for a week and then taking a week's vacation and then starting again. And that has been tried in the past, and it hasn't worked very well. It's very confusing. So the last trimester, the spring trimester, is shorter. It's 9 weeks. Our hope is that there are no snow days in April next year. But barring that, we should be able to, so we have 2 longer trimesters, and the spring one is very short. But we feel we can deal with that in terms of making sure that everybody gets the credit hours they need in that trimester for their high school diploma.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you. Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion? Seeing none, I would just say that any mention of snow days this point of the year is like, geez. Thank you so much for breaking that up or breaking that down for us. All those in favor of approving the Portland Adult Education 2019-2020 calendar, please indicate. Unanimous with the students voting in favor. Thank you. Next up, consideration and action to approve policy GBEEA, use of social media by school staff. Is there a motion? Mr. Atkinson, second by Ms. Figdor. The superintendent speak on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. During the spring of 2018, the Policy Committee began the process of reviewing social media policies. During the fall of 2018, different policy drafts were developed, shared with stakeholders, including the Board Policy Committee, principals, leadership of the Portland Education Association, and attorneys at Drummond Woodsum. At the Policy Committee's February meeting, the committee approved a final version for review by Drummond Woodsum attorneys, and the version that the board considered during its first read included minor edits that were made by Drummond Woodsum. That policy was built largely around Drummond Woodsum's sample policies and the policy currently in use in RSU 21 here in Maine, as well as a policy from Jackson, Michigan. The policy as proposed defines social media. It outlines the parameters for approval of social media in the district for educational uses. It delineates the manner in which school staff can and cannot use social media to communicate with district students. And then it also delineates the appropriate uses of text messaging for communicating with students and outlines administrative responsibilities for monitoring and training of the policy. As you may recall, the board reviewed the policy in a first read and workshop on April 2nd, and at that time, board members raised some issues for consideration by staff and the policy committee. Those concerns were addressed in advance of the April 23rd second reading. However, at the time of the second reading, additional concerns were raised by members of the board, and the policy was returned to the policy committee for revisions. The policy committee met to address those concerns last week, and the revised policy is now before the board again. And so the policy that's before you tonight has changed in a couple of substantive ways. First, it limits staff texting to students who are in high school. And it also requires that parents opt to have the staff communicate with their students via text. Additionally, recognizing that there are circumstances where staff may need to communicate with students via text without prior consent, it does allow staff to text in instances where student safety and well-being are involved.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any questions on the motion? Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, and I appreciate the work that's been done. I have a question, though, for the superintendent. Under student-staff relations on letter E, they have opted the student out of texting. Do we, are we going to develop a form similar to we have for the military in college, recruiting, et cetera? Will that be an opt-out form that will go home with students for parents?
It'll be a checkbox on a form that includes several other opt-ins and opt-outs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Bondo?
Just need to make sure if those forms will be translated on different languages, so each parent can really understand what they're marking for and what's the different process need to go through.
Translate, of course. Yes. Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Morioni, and then Mr. Norris.
So I'm pretty sure it was in the packet, but can the superintendent talk about, we had gotten some concerns, excuse me, some concerns from staff around the need to use social media and texting with students to set up things like job shadowing, things like that. Can you just talk through that and what you
and so those were addressed. We did route the policy to the staff that work in the extended learning opportunities, and I believe that you all may have received the response from Andrea Levinsky, who was one of the people that had raised those concerns. So I do believe that this addresses that.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, Mr. Norris, I'm sorry.
Also under item E, it mentions staff prohibited from texting students on personal phones. Do staff use district-issued phones?
No, I mean, I personally do, but I think I am the only person in the district that has a district-issued phone. Everybody else uses their own personal phone and is reimbursed, is given an allowance over the course of the year for using their personal phone. The policy specifically says that they're not allowed to use their personal phones for anything unrelated to homework, classwork, or school activities. So in essence, it just limits the use of any phone for anything other than homework, classwork, or school activities, such as sporting events, clubs, etc.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If there's no other questions, we'll take public comment on the motion.
Hello, my name's Anita St. Ange, Executive Director at Portland Adult Ed, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about exempting Portland Adult Ed from this policy. There are a number of reasons for that, including the fact that we are dealing with adults. And the other problem with this is defining students. And for us, students come, they go, they leave, they come back. It can be years and years. And when is a student not a student? We also have our community life students who are, I know several of my friends take exercise classes or language classes. You know, where does that definition occur? I know that many of our teachers follow students on Facebook. There are lots of reasons why this it would be very complicated and difficult for Portland Adult Ed.
Thank you. Is there any other public comments? Seeing none, any board discussion? Ms. Thompson?
I guess I would just ask the superintendent in regards to the comments that were just made about the adult population, how that would be addressed.
I think that we could figure out where to place those exemptions. We did not do this in advance of today because the policy was reviewed just last week by the policy committee, and we did not do that. But I believe that Mr. Samuntu has suggestions to that effect today.
Yep. Do you want to use Ms. Thompson's microphone?
Maybe we should answer.
So, if I want to be to complete Anita, I just have a couple problems about the point B2. If you check in draft B2, where when we say like you must use just associate media account Facebook, I want to know Facebook is where, because we have a big issue about that. That is the first point. The second point is the point E. There, I think we talk more about child. So I don't know, in PAU we have adult. So I don't know, that thing cannot match with the policy and cannot adapt for Poland adult ed. For that, I ask if the board member can exempt Poland adult education for that policy, and that can work, because I don't know, the point B2 and the point E, that cannot match with my school. Thank you.
And can I just also point out, and I don't think that Ms. St. Ange mentioned this, but not all staff at Portland Adult Ed have district-issued email addresses, so I think that's where Mr. Samuntu is leading with B2, is that that provision specifically says that you must use not your personal email address, but your school district email address. Is that correct?
Actually, we do have Portland Portland Public Schools email addresses. We don't have any Portland Public Schools devices.
Right. Nobody does, other than me.
Right, but even computers or anything at this point. But we do have them. Not all teachers use them, and most teachers do not use them when they're on Facebook or any of those other
So
things.
what was the concern with B2 then?
As I recall, that was the one that had people communicating with students through Facebook, and the teachers will be using their personal accounts to access Facebook.
Got it.
So do you, I guess there's a question on your comments, Axel. Is it your suggestion that we, in those two, in B2 and in which was the other one? In E.
It was East.
That we, in those two sections, that we specifically write that adult ed students, or do you think there should be a separate point to specify that adult ed is not included in this entire policy?
So for me, I think adult ed must be exempt for all social media policy, because that cannot match with Poland. Because I don't know how we can define it like the student in Poland. We have 3 semesters. The student come and leave. He can drop a class and come back again. That is like a big issue. I don't know if it can match, because some teacher in PA can keep like contact with the student by phone. He can text, why you don't come again, or he can friend with teacher in Facebook, because we have a personal account, So that is my issue. That's why I ask to exempt Poland adult education for all policy.
Ms. Victor and then Ms. Thompson. Thank you, sir.
Just to build on Mr. Sumuntu's suggestion, perhaps we should exclude Portland Adult Ed. I'm getting all my acronyms wrong tonight, so excuse me, I'm just going to say what I mean. Under A, so before we get into the details, let's just exempt them to begin with. So you could, in that first sentence under A, we could just add a simple clause exempting Portland Adult Ed. So you could say, at the end of that first sentence, say other than at Portland Adult Ed. The other place we would need it is in the paragraph on texting. Section E. And we might need it in a couple of places in Section E.
Ms. Thompson.
I was just going to ask the superintendent, is there a way, without doctoring every single paragraph here, that we could just, from the get-go, just put in something about adult education, like as an amendment versus going through every single paragraph? Is that a possibility for an amendment this evening, just to make it applicable that way so we can pass the policy?
I'm sure there is. I'm not
You can get crafty.
the best person to do those things, so.
I think the right person is raising her hand. Okay. Ms. Trevorrow, yeah.
I would suggest perhaps adding another letter, so G, that's entitled exemptions. And the language of that would simply say Portland Adult Ed is exempt from this policy.
Yeah. So I guess we have a motion to add a letter to H?
It's BH, yeah. No, it's
G.
H.
BH. We go up to G, so H. Exempting adult ed, and it's been seconded by Ms. Thompson. Any questions? Mr. Atkinson and then Ms. Bondo? No, I'm just Mr. Atkinson then.
So looking back at E at the very bottom, and I think part of the reason that we're doing this is about making it clear what sorts of communications are appropriate between a staff member and a student, and things like sending inappropriate pictures, engaging in sexualized dialogue. I think that's equally appropriate to have in the policy for Portland Adult Ed. So I don't know if there's some way to tweak this language in the exemption to make it clear that that those particular things are still important and valid parts of the policy that should be applicable to Portland Adult Ed as well.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. I'm going to sort of kind of say the same thing. What I'm hearing, and maybe I'm not hearing exactly what's meant, but what I'm hearing as concerns of this policy as it applies to adult ed sounds more like the challenges of implementing it, or rather enforcing it, and not necessarily whether it's appropriate or not. I do think that some of the things that we're trying to watch with this policy, like the inappropriate conversations, I would still want staff and students at adult ed to have a policy to fall back on in case there is something inappropriate that's been communicated. I'm in absence of a policy, I'm sure it would still rise, as a credible complaint. But I do think that the policy puts us in a better position to respond to such a complaint should it come up. And I don't think that adults are exempt from receiving inappropriate communication from their teachers. So I do understand the uniqueness of adult ed and their students, and I think maybe we can address that unique relationship elsewhere. But to exempt them altogether seems a little bit. To me, it seems difficult for me to support that. Ms. Figdor?
Ms. Bondo and I were speaking about this earlier, and I hope it's okay that I'm bringing this up. But we were talking about it earlier, and she made an excellent point to me that so much at what a Portland Adult Ed does is about community, and I don't want to in any way cut off that community. So, in that paragraph about inappropriate messages, which of course, of course it's appropriate to include that language, but, it says that what staff cannot do is to fraternize or communicate with students as if the employees and students were peers. In the case of Portland Adult Ed, there are teachers and students who are peers, and I think we want to encourage those relationships in that community. So I would support the suggestion that Ms. Trevorrow made to just include a blanket exemption. I think we're not suggesting that inappropriate communications are okay. We're just clarifying the scope of this policy is with regard to K through 12 education.
I think I've lost track. Are we on questions on the amendment, or are we? We're so okay.
I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. Is there any other questions on the amendment? My apologies. Okay, seeing none, is there any public comment on the amendment to add a letter H, one more letter on the policy exempting adult ed students?
Hi, Elizabeth Coe, Newton North Street. Portland Adult Ed may already have a policy about inappropriate sexual conduct. So in a way, it's just like go with Trevorrow's suggestion, and then if they don't have one, they might decide they want to make one. That's my suggestion.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, board discussion, Ms. Morioni? That's okay.
I think I'm fine with, I like Ms. Trevorrow's suggestion here. The other thing, as I was doing some research around this, other districts are, faced with this as well, of course. It's also reminding ourselves that we need to be teaching our students the best use of social media and teaching, again, even in Portland Adult Ed, the best use of this. So I actually would have preferred if we had something in there around that we would also be including something around that, but because really this is their world, this is our world. We're all, I was just on my phone just now, unfortunately, but point being is that the more we can, I thought you were laughing. What I'm trying to say is I like the idea of not being so clamping down on this, because it's going to be so I'll stop there. I think it's getting late already, but yeah, thanks.
Ms. Trevorrow?
So I hear what Board Member Atkinson and Rodriguez have said, and I don't intend the amendment to be sort of a blanket dismissal of the principles that are within the policy, but I think it's a way for us to basically move forward tonight on the policy. It's been worked on quite a bit at this point, and I think other than this one issue, it's a sound policy. So I think we have an opportunity to continue working on policies, we always do, and we can work to address it in whatever way we choose. That's Portland Adult Ed specific at a later time, but this allows us to have a functional policy for adult ed as well as the rest of the district that we can move forward on tonight.
Thank you. Any other board discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, so all those in favor of supporting the amendment of adding a letter H, explicitly exempting, thank you, Ms. Thompson, exempting adult ed students from the social media policy, please indicate. All those opposed? Oh, that never happens. So that's 437 in favor, 1 opposed, and the students voting with the majority. We're back to the main motion. Is there, I forgot where we left off on the main motion. I guess we were in, is there any board discussion? We amended it. So is there any other board discussion on the amended social media policy? Seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. Oh, look at that. We already got further than we did last time. All those in favor of approving policy GBEEA, use of social media by school staff, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor.
Thank you.
Look at that. That didn't take too long, did it? New business, consideration and action to approve a revision to the board's recommended budget to $117,389,270. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Ms. Bondo. The superintendent, please speak to the motion.
I am going to turn it over to Ms. Gardner to do that.
Sorry, so late.
Good evening, board members. So you all have a packet in front of you. It's labeled Proposed Reductions to the PPS FY 2020 budget. So essentially what happened last night, as Chair Rodriguez mentioned, is that the Portland City Council voted to reduce the tax levy for the school department by $450,000. And our Finance Committee met a few weeks ago to discuss some potential reductions that we would be offering up if that went forward. At the time, we had suggested a $411,000 reduction, as that was the amount needed to get our tax rate to 4.9% as opposed to 5%. The city's finance committee recommended the $450,000, and the full city council approved that amount last night. So our finance committee did talk about the 411, and we've amended this to include another $39,000. So I'm just going to go through these items with you right now. This is the staff's recommendation through the superintendent as to where we would recommend that you cut the budget. And if approved, we can sign the cost center summary and send that back to the city clerk, and she will post at the polling location. So this is the last step that would be needed in order to approve our budget tonight. So the first item is to amend our estimates for the breathe reimbursement we would receive through Maine Care. As you may recall, we have only budgeted 75% of the anticipated revenue that we think that we will receive through this programming. Reimbursement, not revenue. Christy would tell me that I shouldn't say that. But this would amend that estimate up to be 80% of the total hours. It's still a 20% buffer, still a very conservative estimate, and that would increase our revenue by $61,000. The next item would be to postpone the Breathe classroom implementation at the high school. This still keeps the elementary Breathe classrooms and the middle school Breathe classrooms, so this is high school only, and the staffing for that was 1 social worker and 4 ed techs. So the expenditure reduction would be $213,000, but then we would also need to remove the related reimbursement for those staff, so that's $55,000. So that's a net reduction of $158,000. There are 2 items in the facilities budget. One is replacement emergency radios. I believe it would put all of the schools on the same emergency channel. We are comfortable bringing this out of the operating budget, as we are working with the City of Portland's Police Department on a grant that would fund radio. So we feel that this can be funded in a different manner as opposed to through the operating budget. So that's $48,000. There is a $23,000 reduction in school furniture. Unfortunately, facilities puts this in every year, and we've cut it for the last 3 years. You know, there's nothing really more to expand about that, but we're just feeling like if there's places that we need to go, that this would be an appropriate place to reduce $23,000. There was a there was a MacBook planned refresh for kindergarten through grade 5 teachers, I believe, that was in the budget for $92,500, and this essentially would half the cost of that. And right now, this says Chromebooks instead of MacBooks, but our executive director of data and technology is working with the superintendent on a variety of different plans on how we would implement that technology plan. So that's not necessarily what would happen. It's just reflecting that we would have to do the implementation in some other manner. So that could be Chromebooks, it could be staged implementation of some MacBooks. So essentially the plan would just be changed, and that would be reduced by $46,000. And then the last 2 items are, the first one is to reduce board contingency by $64,000, which would bring the board contingency to $111,000. And I know that we've talked about this in years past, and we have spent since FY15 about $30,000 a year in board contingency items. I have the exact data that I can send to any of you if you have questions on that, but we're comfortable that with around $111,000 that would be an okay amount to move forward with. Again, as you may recall, last year we reduced this to $135,000, and in this budget process we brought it back up to prior year levels, so it was at $175,000, so this would bring it to $111,000. And then the last item is to reduce central office contracted services. And we haven't identified exactly where that's coming from, but it would be essentially any system administration contracted services at this time. So it's just one state budget category, so we can just kind of say somewhere at central office, and we'll make that adjustment later. So that's $50,000. So altogether, that's $450,000. And I do want to say one more thing. The way that the city council approved this was that the expenditure reduction was $444,000 and the revenue increase was $6,000. So if the board decides not to do it this way, we still need to fit within those parameters, as that's essentially the appropriation that the city council has given us. I'm done.
Thank you, Alicia. Do we have any questions on the motion? Ms. Thompson?
So the question on the postponed Breathe High School, I know that we were reconfiguring staff, et cetera, for the various levels. So with this reduction, that was new positions, and it won't result in any layoffs, is that correct?
Correct, these are all new positions.
Okay, so no layoffs. In board contingency, you were saying that $30,000 is typically what we spend in a year, and in years past, which it sounds like we haven't used it, and maybe we should be, as part of this, is for things that are not, we're not covered, be able to cover through the typical budget. When it says board contingency, I think it's a little misleading, because we've bought boilers in the past, so it's not really all about the board, it's just another place to put in case we need to buy something on behalf of. So I was kind of thinking of the furniture too under board contingency, but anyway. And then the contracted services, you said system administration, would that be something like outside marketing, or what kind of things?
So that would be usually outside contractors that we bring in to help do sort of a study or a survey or some outside contracted work that we, extra audit services or something along those lines.
Okay, so technically with that as well, I mean, we've done that before under board contingency as well, as we've paid for the services of various firms. So those are the questions that I had. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Bondo.
I just have a question. I think it's going to be on the superintendent for the postponement of the Brief High School. The way we've been mentioned, I think how comfortable you are to try to postpone those Brief on the high school, because when I see what the investment really going to reflect, because when we see what's happening to the high school right now, and postponing that program to be implemented right now, are you feeling that we can have some loopholes between the time that we may think about going forward, maybe for next year?
I mean, that is the intent, that we've always talked about this as postponement, not as not doing it. So I think that our goal would be to have this be included in the budget next year. We have a classroom in each of our comprehensive high schools that is a classroom for students that are in their IEPs have either behavior or conduct issues, and this is intended to just make those programs more high quality and akin to what we're trying to do at the elementary level. So this is specifically, I believe, 2 ed techs for each of the schools and a social work position to be shared that would be dedicated to these 2 classrooms. So that's what we would delay, excuse me, that's what we would delay implementing. So not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. I think that we've talked about this whole program as being critical to our being able to, to do what we're trying to do as a district. And so I still think that we're making some very significant inroads in this area this year with those same kind of staffing increases at the middle school and the establishment of the elementary level Breathe programs. And this is something that we currently have a classroom has a teacher and an ed tech. We were hoping to make that a more robust program, and we would not be able to do that.
For the contract services that you mentioned, I think you just highlight just a little bit. I hope we don't cutting anything, because I know the multilingual also have some contracted service on the side for translator and interpreter who's coming outside and helping schools. So I hope it's not including that.
No, this would be coming from like the superintendent, finance, HR sort of
okay.
region.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Norris?
So for the FTEs being taken away from the BREATHE program, it's just the classroom ed techs and none of the lead teachers from that program?
Correct. So every position would be the positions we were adding to the budget. So everyone that is currently there will still be there.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Excellent. I did not have any questions. I think I just had some questions just to hear. I wanted to hear the superintendent speak of what was currently being offered at the high school levels if we were to postpone the high school. But I think he spoke on that after Ms. Bondo's question. So do we have any public comment on the motion?
I describe it as.
Hello, I'm still Elizabeth Capone Newton, and I still live at North Street, although it's feeling like I live here. This is my personal overflow shelter right now. So let's see. I was thinking that my understanding, there was just a clarification about what the positions were. My understanding is that the 158, is it 158 or 157,000 for BREATHE?
158.
Thank you. My understanding is that it was for social work positions, so that then ed techs could be hired and reimbursement could happen for ed techs with Maine Care funds, and then the ed techs can't be hired if there's not a social worker supervising them. So essentially, we're sort of losing quite a bit of value by not being able to bring in that Maine Care income. So we were going to be able to fund more positions with the Maine Care income, and the 158,000 is for social work positions. Is that right? Can someone confirm that? Because is this Mr. Norris?
I mean,
he asked if it was ed techs, and it would lead to the loss of ed techs by not being able to have a social work supervisor. But
so I'm gonna explain the blank stares that you're getting. We don't normally answer questions from public comment, but in a moment, I just heard the superintendent. He's gonna kind of clarify that in a moment.
okay, is it okay to pause my time while he clarifies?
If you have another question, just shoot them all out now, and then we'll.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a suggestion that you know, obviously it was really great that 117 million plus passed, and that's wonderful. And of all the things that would have to get cut with the about 450,000, it seems like the high school implementation of BREATHE would be kind of the most lost in terms of the Portland Promise. So, and we could think about, you know, the difference that this could make in individual young people's lives. My understanding is that it would affect about 24 to 26 of them. So even though it's not horrible, you know, maybe it's nice to think of a creative way to do something good. So when I heard that the average board contingency for the past years was around 30,000, my suggestion was that you could lower your board contingency by 79,000, which is half of 158,000. It would reduce it to 32,000, and then you could seek matching funds to get to the 158. And I don't know if you have a grant writer on staff. It's one of the skills in my toolbox, and I'd be willing to volunteer for you, but I'm sure there's people in your, I don't remember the name of the foundation right now, but I'm sure you could raise $79,000, especially in the context of a match, especially in the context of being able to bring state funds. And I know it might, I'm going to ask for just a little more time since I lost a little in asking the questions.
We can do another minute.
Okay, awesome, thanks. So I grew up in Auburn, and my mom was a city councilor in Auburn. So I got to meet John Cleveland, who was the longtime mayor of Auburn, and then went on to be in the state senate for quite a while. And now he consults with cities and towns all across Maine. And so when I wanted to really understand the budget process well, I gave him a call the other day because I wanted to understand how city managers manage budgets and the difficult choices that they're forced to make. So what was really helpful about talking to Mr. Cleveland, it was to understand that, the city does have the ability to change things in very slight ways, even after, of course, the rules that govern your body interact with the city. But anyways, they have the ability to change things slightly as needed, even after July 1, right? They might have to, if it doesn't affect the entire department, they might have to go to the council to approve it. But my simple point, to wrap it up, is that should you not be able to raise the $79,000 and then you can't roll out the program, okay, no problem. That's not the end of the world at all, right? But I would just say, give it a try, you could probably do it. And it would be really great for those 25 high school students who are probably the most at-risk kids in your district or close to it. And if you ran the numbers on the 25 to see if they're disproportionately low income, ELL, and students of color, my guess is that you would find that they are because of how social oppression works. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Hello, my name is Eva Humanik. I live in Deering Center, District 5. I know a lot of you through Protect Our Neighborhood Schools and as a PTO leader at Longfellow, but today I'm here as a parent. I'm here as a parent who's pretty terrified to send my child to high school next year. And I'm not alone. 1 in 3 parents fear for their children's safety in our schools. And they are not alone because, according to the Pew Research Center, 57% of our high schoolers are afraid in school. They are afraid of mass shootings. And these children are first generation who have to be confronted with their own mortality just by attending school, and they need our support. Millions of high schoolers haven't experienced a school shooting, yet they live in fear every day that they will. We cannot expect our children to focus on learning and growing into functional, emotional adults without these social emotional services that they desperately need. And I have heard that this new Breathe program would be still implemented in our middle schools and in our elementary schools. However, our nation's high schoolers are experiencing record high levels of depression and anxiety and teen suicide. They are hurting so much that they are mass murdering each other, and I wish that that was an exaggeration. One of the tenets of the Portland Promise is equity amongst our schools, and I call on you to please find a way to reallocate the $158,000 that's needed to include our high schools in this new Breathe program, because they need adequate social emotional services, the same as all of the other students in Portland. These school shootings are a national crisis in our country, and the adequate and quality social emotional services must be a priority for all of our students. So I just wanted to say that, and I also just wanted to point out, totally unrelated, it would be really nice if the school board had free childcare, because it's really difficult to come to these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Victoria Parker, Longfellow. We spoke a lot last year during the budget season. Tonight I'm not speaking on behalf of the elementary schools, but I am up here speaking for our upper schools and in full support of the Breathe school and program and getting more social emotional programs into our high school during this critical time right now in the climate of things like Eva mentioned, anxiety, depressions, equity. It seems incredibly critical to have these programs with the students who need them the most. I have a middle schooler right now, but I'll have 2 next year. There's a lot of need in our middle schools, but I too fear high school and the things that are going to happen or could happen. And I don't want Portland to be on the map because something happens in our school because we are not providing the resources that these students need. So please, please find a way to support these programs, get the social workers in there that are needed, the ed techs, and the support for our students. Thank you.
Any other board comments? Excuse me, any public comments? Excuse me. Sorry, Mr. Norris.
Good evening. My name is Kate Kessler. I'm a Portland resident. I have a daughter at Ocean Avenue School, and I teach at Lyseth. Seen a few of you in this process earlier, so thank you. I wanted to follow up on both of the previous comments and also speak in great support of the Portland Promise and the ideals that are behind it. As a parent and as a teacher, those, I think, highlight a lot of the things that I think about personally, and I think those are really great goals. And so in order to support those goals, I think about the work we're doing as a district around PBIS, positive behavior programs, and the equity cohort that we've been working on this year. And in order to really make those things happen, so much depends on the relationships adults in schools have with kids. And I can only speak repeatedly about the importance of having as many adults as possible in our schools. And so when faced with these hard choices as a parent and as a teacher and as a person in the community, I would just encourage always awareness and thoughtfulness, as I know you all are, around keeping as many teachers in classrooms as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other public comment, we'll close the floor and bring it back to the board for board discussion. Ms. Thompson?
I have a question for the superintendent. So the BREATHE program for the elementary and middle school is a new model. We currently have services, it's my understanding, for elementary, middle, and high school through our Bayside program. So when we talk about the social emotional services, the high school students are not going to go without services. It's just this particular model that has been created will not be implemented at the high school level, but they're not going to be students that are just left to their own accord. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We currently have at both Deering and Portland one classroom with a teacher and an ed tech, in addition to the Bayside High School program. So that currently exists. The reduction would prevent us from adding a social worker that would work in both of those schools and a couple of ed techs for each of those classrooms. The ed techs would be there to help kids go from this the classroom into regular classes and have support for regulation and for whatever assistance they needed. So that's what would be that's what would not be implemented next year.
Okay, so in your opinion, though, obviously you picked this one on the high school level. So ideally, it would be nice to implement the full, but do you feel comfortable in the fact of not having this and maybe next year doing it and doing, because I know we've talked about a phased-in approach as well when we were talking through the budget of doing the program that way. So do you have any reservations in regards to your recommendations?
Yes, I have reservations about it. This would not, if we weren't having to reduce the budget by $450,000, we wouldn't be doing this. But, we don't have a lot of places to go, and this is one thing that, again, it's all it's sort of a double jeopardy, right? This is something that you don't want to do, but at least you have an existing program, an existing classroom, and, we're not going to make it better. And that's what we're doing at all other levels with Breathe, and so we're not able to do that. So am I comfortable with it? No. But at the same time, I realize that we have to make some reductions, and there's a limited number of places where we can go to do that.
Okay, that clarifies. Thank you.
Any other board discussion? Mr. Atkinson? Excuse me.
I have a question. What would the estimated cost of just the social worker for that program be? Is there? Ooh.
That would have been cute. Hopefully no one's watching. So about $60,000 for a social worker.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question. The reductions do not include the lead social worker that we're adding?
Correct.
And the reduction does not include the the 2 special ed teachers that we're
Correct.
adding?
Those are going, I believe, to the elementary level.
Excellent. Ms. Bondo, and then Mr. Atkinson again.
I'm still on the high school, and when we mention about it, we still have the lead for the social workers going to overview also the high schools, because even though we still have a class, 1 or 2 classes in the high school, so the lead social workers going to overview all the everything is happening, because I'm really wondering about the quality, because what we're doing with elementary school and middle school, the new model is about the quality of the service we're going to improve.
So can I say one thing before Malia's going to talk about that? Part of the reason for the social worker capacity and the 2 additional EdTechs is so we could bill Maine Care.
Oh, okay.
So without those positions, we then can't bill for the services. So that's sort of why they're rolled in together, and I know that was a question that someone had brought up. So it was really a half-time social worker at each school and then 2 additional ed techs to complement the existing ed tech and teacher that are already there. But Malia can speak to the lead social worker.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, can you repeat, what was the question, Ms. Bondo?
Yes, I tried to figure out about the quality, because what happened now, the new model that we want to implement for the elementary school and for all the BRAVE program, if we went through now, we try to postpone the high school. I just wonder about the quality that we're going to offer now, because what's going to happen now to the high school, they're going to just still be the same way they've been doing on the social worker with those 1 or 2 classes, or we're going to have some model adding on that.
So I'll
with
answer
the new model. With the new
so,
model.
One of the things, what's most new is the fact that we've added in this place within the continuum of least restrictive services at elementary. So we've had some service for high school and middle school all along. So we didn't have that at elementary, and we needed to add that back in. And then in this redesign, we were looking really closely at, how should we do this based on best practice? And that's where we developed the model that we now have come to call Breathe, that does invest in more social work support and the related ed techs, which enable students to mainstream and have a more ultimately inclusive experience in school. So in terms of what's happening with high school, all of the support structures around the behavior, or the continuum, the Breathe continuum, will still be in place across all grade levels. So the lead social worker, the director, Christy Morin, who you've met, all of those people will still be looking K through 12 at the program and the services. The thing that's not going to be in place per this cut or this reduction is what everyone's described, which is a half-time social worker at each of the Portland High and Deering High, because it's a split person in that additional ed tech capacity. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Question. Ms. Victor, excuse me.
So just to get maybe one level more specific in terms of what the cut in services might mean for individual students, my understanding is that it's less that we won't be meeting the students' socio-emotional and educational needs, but more we won't be providing them the additional experience of mainstreaming into regular classrooms? Or is that going too far?
I mean, our high school students currently do mainstream into classrooms with the existing resources that we have. Just looking at the program in what sort of how we need to ramp that up and put more evidence-based practices and have more consistency, we need some more capacity to do that. But I mean, just to be clear, they do mainstream for portions of the day. As with any student on an IEP, it would vary and depend on what the IEP dictates and how the student's doing that particular day. Our high school classrooms for students with emotional and behavioral disabilities currently collaborate pretty closely with our alternative ed program, especially during high school, and I don't know as much about that collaboration at Portland High School. So I mean, the social work addition, I mean, that is a loss in this reduction, or in this hold.
And I do want to point out, and I'm going back to one of the questions that somebody raised during public comment. We will continue to look for ways to be able to do this with, in this year. So it might not be a full social work position split between the two. It might be half. It might be that we can only add one ed tech. But as we start the school year, there's the potential to find savings. And again, as we look at these, that is the one area where we recognize that we are losing important services that we're committed to providing. So we're talking about postponing it till next year, but it might be that we're postponing it until January if we can find the funds to do that. So I think that there are other areas that we will look to see if we can get reductions, for example, in kids that are currently placed out of district. If fewer students are placed out of district and we're able to reallocate some of those resources, we will do that because we're committed to doing this program.
Thank you. Ms. Victor.
So, Mr. Superintendent, would you say that if we are in a situation where there are resources, more resources available, that funding the expansion of Breathe at the high school level would be a top priority?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other board discussion? Ms. Trevor?
I agree with my fellow board members that the one area of this that really hurts is the Breathe program and not being able to expand that at the high school level. But on the whole, I'm supporting these reductions because I think that this represents overall a really strong budget. We're able to basically maintain our staff levels and then on top of that make investments in crucial areas that are targeted for the Portland Promise. So I think that what we were able to garner this year in terms of a budget is very strong. And I think I'm proud of it, and I think it's something that we can advocate for the voters to support in June. So I'm supporting this. I also know that a budget is sort of a placeholder situation, so it is a movable document over time as what is unknown today becomes known down the line, and it's helpful to hear the superintendent say that would be a priority if funding were to come available.
Ms. Bondo.
I was a little cautious before, but now I'm really supporting this cut after the last answer from the superintendent, because it's really give a little more hope than, we can be able to go with the high school and be able to involve some of our community partners working on some of the different funding and be able to advocate that one to the community. So I will support that.
Thank you, Ms. Molnar. Anyone else? Seeing none, excuse me, I'll say that I think we're about to vote on our FY20 budget one last time. I am incredibly proud of the budget, but like we've said tonight, the not being able to implement the high school part of the BREATHE program is certainly, that's a loss. That's a huge loss, especially in a budget that's surrounded by so many other investments that are intended to advance the Portland Promise goals. And clearly, mental and behavioral health is something that's it could significantly advance some of the metrics that we're looking at through the equity and whole student goals. So I do feel like in the next year, I'm hoping that when we see the actual reimbursement come back, that we do see them above what we've been projecting. We've been projecting, like we saw tonight, up to 80%. So hopefully we realize something higher than that, and we do see an increase in our revenues next year, and it makes that decision or that finding funds for the high school program a little bit easier to pass. I'm incredibly proud of what the other investments that we have in the budget. I think starting our expansion of pre-K program, that's a game changer in this district. And the fact that, I really appreciate, Mr. Atkinson, that the Public Affairs Committee is going to talk with community members about the Portland Promise and continue to have that discussion. But I just heard public comment that it was entirely based on the understanding of the Portland Promise. And I've heard from many teachers over the budget process speak of the Portland Promise as their foundational kind of platform for where they stand on supporting or not our budget. So I hear this Portland Promise being used the way that the board uses as a way to see how the district envisions budgets, envisions our values, and the way that we take care of our students. So I do see us getting closer to that. We got to keep it up, though. So I'm glad that you're going to continue to address those folks that don't fully understand the Portland Promise, because if you do understand the Portland Promise and you see what this budget includes, you can really agree that this board is zeroed that, or is really just narrowing down on seeing our budget through that lens, and that's incredibly helpful for what we're trying to achieve here. So having said all that, we're about to vote. Excuse me. All those in favor of approving a revision to the board's recommended budget to $117,389,270, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor as well. Good job, guys. So, like we said earlier tonight, this does not have to go back to the city council, so this is going straight to the referendum on June 11th. So we've made it that far. Superintendent wanted to make a few comments before we get to the next item.
Do we have a second item that we need to, let's save
yes, we do have another
for that. So we just, let's do the other one.
So, consideration and action to revise the vote entitled Vote to Approve Submission of School Budget with Additional Local Funds in form presented to this meeting, and that a copy of said vote be included in the minutes of this meeting. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Ms. Thompson. Superintendent, speak to the motion.
I have nothing to add.
Are there any this is a procedural
motion.
Thing. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none. Any public comment on the motion? None. Any board discussion? We'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of revising the vote entitled Vote to Approve Submission of School Budget with Additional Local Funds in form presented to this meeting, and that a copy of said vote be included in the minutes of this meeting, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor. And now the superintendent wanted to make a few comments.
Okay. Now that we're done with our work on the budget, I would like to take a moment to recognize Alicia Gardner. That would be you. As you know, Alicia is leaving PPS at the beginning of June to take on a new role as comptroller at Colby College. Alicia has been with Portland Public Schools for the past 3 budget processes. trees count their lifetime in rings, and budget directors in budget processes. Alicia has been the most incredible partner in this work. Over my career, I've worked with many budget directors, and none have been smarter or more technically competent than Alicia. But what has made her stand out is her incredibly deep commitment to the work of the organization and her respect for the work of the organization. Many times over my career, I've felt the lack of interest in the core work of the school district from the quote-unquote numbers people, as if it were the same work to do in a school district, a nonprofit agency, or any business. But Alicia always cared about the purpose of our work. As the daughter of teachers, she understands the work that Portland Public Schools does, and she never, ever loses sight of how important her role is in allowing us to do that. So I admit I have Alicia dependency, and she knows it, so much so that she's agreed to stay on through the month of June in a consulting role to support our transition and to help me break the habit slowly. Last night during the council's meeting, Councilor Cook asked the question. I got up to answer it, and Anita St. Ange beat me to the mic. What was so incredible to me was that by the time that Anita had settled at the mic, Alicia had found the Finance Committee packet where we had answered that question on her phone and came up to give it to Anita so that she would have the detailed response. To me, that personified what Alicia has been for the past 3 years, always thinking ahead, deeply knowledgeable of the material, quick to the take, incredibly resourceful, and doing something on her phone. So, Alicia, thank you. We're going to do this again next.
Yes.
Because I have that Alicia dependency thing, so.
Thank you, Superintendent. It is the after 10 p.m. and we only have one more, two quick little personnel items. So if it's okay with everybody, we'll move through them. We won't vote to stay on just because it's quick. So on personnel items, the consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, election of first continuing contract teachers. Is there a motion? Ms. Figdor, second by Ms. Morioni. Barb, do you have something to start?
Hi, board members. Always tough to come at the very end of a long night, and that was a tough act to follow. So we do have 2 probationary teachers to bring forward for renewal this evening. So as we did on May 7th, we're required by statute to nominate these educators to bring them forward. Both of these educators were serving under 1-year-only contracts, which is why we didn't bring them forward on May 7th. They've now been hired into existing permanent positions, and that's why the superintendent is nominating them tonight for continued employment. Of the 2 teachers before you, one has completed his 3-year probationary period already, and so the superintendent is nominating him for a continuing contract. And the second teacher has been employed for less than 3 years, and she is being nominated for an additional probationary year of teaching in the district.
Thank you. Any board questions on the motion? Seeing none, there's no public comment on personnel items. Any board discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, election of first continuing contract teachers, please indicate. It is unanimous with the students voting in favor as well. Consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, re-election of first probationary teachers. Is there a motion? Mr. Atkinson, second by Mr. Balfons. Nothing to add? Any board questions? Seeing none, no public comment on personnel items. All those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, re-election of probationary teachers, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor. It is after 10 p.m. and there's no one here to give public comments. So then we'll move to adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn the business meeting? Ms. Bondo, second by Ms. Trevor. All those in favor, please indicate. We're adjourned at 10:12 p.m. Thank you all very much.